The billionaire did not freeze because she was counting pennies. He froze because the name on the medicine bottle belonged to his dead son. Mariah Brooks had 17 cents left when the pharmacist told her the inhaler would cost $63.42. Not 63 even. Not something clean enough for mercy. $63.42, spoken under the hard white lights of a 24-hour pharmacy on the south side of Chicago, while rain tapped against the front windows and her 6-year-old daughter sat 2 chairs away trying to breathe quietly so nobody would stare. Mariah looked down at the counter as if the answer might appear between the coins. Pennies. Mostly pennies. Some so dark they looked almost brown under the fluorescent lights. 2 nickels. 1 dime. A quarter she had found that morning under the dryer at work. She lined them up with 2 fingers, smoothing them into little rows, as if neatness could turn copper into enough. Behind her someone sighed. A man in a Cubs jacket shifted his basket from one arm to the other. A woman near the greeting cards whispered something Mariah pretended not to hear. The pharmacist, a tired young man with a name tag that said Aaron, lowered his voice and said, "Ma'am, even with the discount card you're still short." Mariah nodded once. Not because it was okay. Because nodding was the only thing she could do without falling apart. "How short?" she asked, though she already knew there was no number small enough to save her. Aaron glanced at the screen. $11.86. Mariah closed her eyes for half a second. $11.86. That was almost 2 bus rides. That was a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, and 1 can of chicken noodle soup if the store brand was still on sale. That was the difference between getting Ava through the night and sitting beside her bed listening for the terrifying space between one breath and the next. "I can put something back," Mariah said. She reached into the small red basket at her elbow and removed the pack of batteries for Ava's nebulizer. Aaron looked at the screen and shook his head. "That brings it down some, but not enough." She removed the can of soup, the travel-size bottle of children's fever reducer, the roll of paper towels she needed because the apartment sink had started leaking again. Each item made a soft sound as she placed it aside. Each sound felt louder than the people waiting behind her. Ava watched from the chair with her backpack hugged to her chest, the purple one with the unicorn patch Mariah had sewn over a tear. Her small shoulders rose and fell carefully. Too carefully. Children were not supposed to learn how to hide pain from their mothers. Mariah turned and gave her a smile that had cost more than anything on the counter. "We're okay, baby," she said. Ava nodded because Ava always tried to be brave when Mariah needed her to be a child. The bell above the pharmacy door chimed, and a tall man in a dark overcoat stepped inside out of the rain. Nathaniel Whitmore did not belong in that store at that hour. Everything about him looked too clean for the place, from the polished black shoes to the silver watch half hidden beneath his cuff. He had come in only because his driver had pulled over to take an urgent call and Nate, restless after a hospital board dinner, had walked across the street for aspirin he did not need. He saw the line first, then the woman at the counter, then the coins. He had seen poverty before, but usually from the safe distance of reports, donor events, and foundation photographs where hardship arrived already framed and softened for wealthy people to understand. This was different. This was a mother counting pennies beneath lights that made everyone look tired. This was a child pretending not to wheeze. This was a pharmacist trying not to shame someone while a computer did it for him. Nate took 1 step closer. Mariah did not look back. She was reaching for the last item in the basket now, the small white and blue box attached to the prescription bottle by a rubber band. Her hand paused on it. Aaron saw what she was about to do and said gently, "Ma'am, that's the medicine." "I know," Mariah whispered. Her voice was steady, but her thumb pressed so hard into the label that the edge bent under her nail. "Is there a smaller one? A partial? Just enough for tonight?" Aaron typed something, waited, then shook his head again. "Insurance denied the partial refill. It says prior authorization required." Mariah gave a small laugh with no humor in it. "They required that last week." "I'm sorry." Sorry doesn't open her lungs. The line went quiet. Not kind quiet. Uncomfortable quiet. The kind of quiet people make when truth lands too close to them, and they do not want responsibility for hearing it. Nate moved forward before he decided to. "I'll cover it," he said. Mariah turned then, and he saw her face fully for the first time. Rain still caught in the curls near her temple, exhaustion under her eyes, dignity held so tightly it looked like armor. "No," she said. "Just one word. Not rude. Not grateful. Final." Nate blinked. Most people accepted help from him before he finished offering it. "Please," he said. "It's only $11. Something in Mariah's expression changed. "Only," she repeated softly. That word traveled farther than he expected. She looked at his coat, his watch, the calm way money sat on him like weather that never turned bad. "Sir, my daughter doesn't need to become your good deed for the night." Ava coughed from the chair. Mariah's face broke for a second, then rebuilt itself. She turned back to the counter. "Aaron, run the card again. Maybe my paycheck cleared early." Aaron hesitated, then swiped it. Declined. Mariah did not flinch. She simply reached into her coat pocket and pulled out one more thing. A folded bus transfer, damp at the edges, wrapped around 3 pennies. She placed them on the counter like a final offering. Nate's eyes dropped to the prescription bottle as Aaron picked it up to rescan the coupon. The label turned toward him. Patient name: Ava Whitmore Brooks. Date of birth: March 14th. Nate stopped breathing. The pharmacy, the rain, the line, the coins, everything seemed to fall backward into silence. Whitmore. His name. His family's name. Printed on a medicine bottle held together with a rubber band, paid for in pennies by a woman who looked at him like he was just another rich man passing through. Then he saw the birth date, and the floor seemed to shift beneath his polished shoes. March 14th. The night Caleb called him 11 times. The night Nate let every call go unanswered because he was angry, because he was proud, because he thought there would be time in the morning. Caleb was dead before sunrise. Nate stared at the bottle in Aaron's hand, then at the little girl in the chair, whose eyes were the exact warm brown of a son he had buried 7 years ago. Mariah noticed his face change. Her hand moved quickly, protectively, over the bottle. "Don't," she said. It was not a request. It was a warning from someone who had already survived being dismissed by people with expensive names. Nate tried to speak, but the only words that came out were barely more than air. "Why does your daughter have that name?" Mariah's eyes hardened, and for one terrible second, Nate understood that whatever answer waited behind that bottle had not been hidden by poverty. It had been buried by power. Mariah did not answer Nathaniel Whitmore in the pharmacy. She took the medicine bottle from Aaron with one hand, swept the pennies back into her palm with the other, and put her body between the billionaire and her daughter as naturally as breathing. Protection did not always look like shouting. Sometimes it looked like a mother zipping a child's coat all the way to the chin and saying, "Come on, Ava. We have to catch the bus." The rain had slowed to a thin silver mist by the time they stepped outside. The pharmacy lights spilled onto the wet sidewalk behind them, bright and cold, while the city moved around them without caring what had almost happened inside. Mariah kept Ava close under the broken umbrella, even though one rib had snapped weeks ago and the fabric sagged on the left side. Ava held the white paper pharmacy bag against her chest like it was something precious, because it was. Inside was one inhaler, one refill she had needed 3 days ago, one more night where Mariah might be able to sleep with both ears open instead of sitting upright in the dark counting breaths. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Mariah could have asked the rich man for a ride. She could have let him pay for a cab. She could have turned around and said, "Yes, if your name means something in this city, make it mean something for us." But she did not. She had learned the price of easy help. Easy help came with paperwork. Easy help came with people asking why she had waited so long, why she had not planned better, why there was no father listed in the right box, why she had kept a name nobody believed belonged to her child. So she walked. Her work shoes slapped softly against the wet pavement, the left heel worn down unevenly because she had been meaning to replace them since October. It was February now. Chicago cold did not ask if you were tired. It moved through sleeves, under collars, into bones, and stayed there. Ava's small hand tightened around hers. "Mama," she said, "was that man mad at us?" Mariah looked down. Ava's eyes were wide, not scared exactly, but watchful in the way children become when they grow up around adult problems. "No, baby." "Then why did he look like that?" Mariah swallowed. The bus shelter came into view, its plastic panels scratched with old marker, its bench still wet from the rain. "Some people see a name and think it belongs to them," she said. But your name belongs to you. Ava thought about that with the seriousness of a child who had been forced to understand too much too early. Because Daddy gave it to me? Mariah's fingers tightened, then softened before Ava could feel it. Because it is true, she said. That was all she could give her daughter at the bus stop. Not the whole story. Not yet. The apartment on South Vernon Avenue sat above a closed check-cashing store with a flickering sign and a metal gate pulled over the front. Their unit was on the 3rd floor, 3 flights up because the building had no elevator and the landlord said fixing old buildings took time. Mariah had stopped believing that sentence 2 winters ago. The hallway smelled like damp carpet, radiator heat, and someone frying onions behind a thin door. Ava climbed slowly, one hand on the rail, stopping once on the second landing to breathe. Mariah pretended not to notice until the pause became too long. Then she crouched beside her and opened the pharmacy bag. "1 puff now," she said. Ava nodded, trying to be casual, but her small chest lifted. "Too high." Mariah shook the inhaler, fitted the spacer, counted under her breath, and watched her daughters face the way other people watch traffic lights. Red. Yellow. Green. Wait. Breathe. Again. Ava took the medicine, held it, released it. Color returned slowly to her cheeks. Mariah smiled as if this were normal, as if mothers in America were supposed to kneel in apartment stairwells at 10:30 at night and pray that a plastic device worked before the next rent notice came. "Better?" she asked. Ava nodded. "Better." Inside their apartment, the heat was on but weak, clanking through the radiator like a tired old man clearing his throat. The place was small enough that Mariah could stand near the door and see almost everything. The narrow kitchen, the fold-out sofa where she slept, the little table with 2 mismatched chairs, the curtained corner that belonged to Ava, and the window that looked out at a brick wall close enough to make daylight feel borrowed. But it was clean. That mattered to Mariah. The floor was swept. Ava's school papers were clipped to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like an apple. The dishes were washed and stacked upside down on a towel because the cabinet under the sink leaked when it rained. A lavender candle with no wick left sat on the table because Ava liked the smell even after it could no longer burn. Poverty had taken many things from Mariah Brooks, but it had not taken order. It had not taken care. It had not taken the quiet pride of making a child's corner feel like a room. Ava hung her backpack on the hook by the door, the one Mariah had installed herself with a screwdriver borrowed from Mrs. Alvarez downstairs. "Can I have noodles?" Ava asked. "You can have the good noodles," Mariah said. The good noodles were the same 99-cent ramen, but with half a boiled egg and frozen peas stirred in. Ava smiled like that was a restaurant meal, and Mariah turned away before gratitude could break her heart. She filled a small pot with water, then opened the cabinet. 1 pack left. She had known that already. Mariah always knew what was left. She knew there were 7 slices of bread, 1 apple soft on one side, half a jar of peanut butter, 3 eggs, and a bag of rice in the back. She knew her checking account had $9.13 after the pharmacy charge cleared. She knew payday was Thursday, rent was already 4 days late, and the hospital billing department had called twice that afternoon while she was folding sheets in the basement laundry room of St. Agnes Medical Center. Numbers did not visit Mariah. They lived with her. They sat at the table. They rode the bus. They followed her into sleep and waited at the edge of morning. While the noodles cooked, Mariah pulled the damp bus transfer from her pocket and placed it on the table beside a stack of envelopes. Rent notice. Utility reminder. Pediatric pulmonology appointment. Insurance denial. Second insurance denial. Final request for prior authorization. She did not throw them away. She kept everything. Every receipt, every prescription label, every doctor's note, every name of every person who had told her to call another department. She kept them in a blue plastic folder with a cracked spine because one day, someone would ask for proof, and Mariah had promised herself she would have so much proof they would choke on it. She had not gone to college, but she had learned systems the way people learn dangerous neighborhoods, which corners to avoid, which doors were locked, which voices sounded kind but meant no. At St. Agnes, she worked in the hospital laundry from 6 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon, feeding sheets and gowns into machines taller than she was, pulling warm bundles out until her arms ached and the steam made her hairline damp. At 4 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, She cleaned offices at a dental building near Hyde Park. On weekends, she picked up extra shifts doing motel rooms when Mrs. Alvarez could watch Ava. People called it unskilled labor because they had never watched Mariah remove blood from a hospital sheet without tearing the fabric, fold fitted sheets into perfect squares, calm a feverish child over the phone during a 10-minute break, and still arrive at school pickup with a smile in place. They had never seen her stretch $20 across 5 days. With the precision of an engineer. They had never seen her read medication inserts at midnight with a dictionary app open because no doctor had explained the side effects slowly enough. Mariah was not poor because she did not work. She was poor because work in her world came with holes in the bottom. Money entered and fell straight through. Rent, medicine, bus fare, childcare, co-pays, late fees, the extra charge for paying the bill after the grace period ended. By the time she sat down, there was rarely anything left but the ache in her hands. Ava ate at the table, swinging her feet above the floor, telling Mariah about a spelling test, and a girl named Madison who had brought cupcakes with rainbow sprinkles. "Did you get one?" Mariah asked, stirring her own bowl though she had given Ava most of the noodles. "Yes. I saved you a sprinkle." Ava reached into her pocket and pulled out a napkin folded into a tiny square. Inside was one pink sprinkle slightly crushed. Mariah looked at it for a moment. Then she placed it on her tongue like communion. "Best sprinkle I ever had," she said. Ava laughed, and for 3 seconds, the apartment was not overdue bills and weak heat and a medicine bottle with a dangerous name. It was just a mother and a child at a table, making a feast out of almost nothing. Later, after Ava brushed her teeth and changed into pajamas with faded stars on the sleeves, Mariah sat beside her bed and rubbed cocoa butter into the dry patches on her elbows. Ava held the inhaler in both hands. "Do I have to take this to school tomorrow?" "Yes." "What if somebody sees my name?" Mariah's hand stopped. "Who said something about your name?" Ava looked down. "Miss Carter asked why it says Whitmore on some papers and Brooks on others. I told her Brooks is yours and Whitmore is mine too. She said families can be complicated." Mariah looked toward the window, at the brick wall outside, at the thin reflection of herself in the glass. Tired face. Work shirt. Hair pinned up with 2 bobby pins because she had lost the clip. A woman the world kept mistaking for someone with no history, no claim, no right to stand at certain doors and say, "You owe my daughter the truth." "Families are complicated," Mariah said carefully. "But you are not." Ava's eyes lifted. "Am I in trouble?" That question landed harder than the pharmacy bill. Mariah leaned down and held her daughter's face between both hands. "No, ma'am. You are not in trouble for existing. You hear me? Never." Ava nodded, but Mariah could see the fear still tucked behind her eyes. That was the thing she hated most. Not the poverty. Not the bus rides. Not the jobs that left her back sore and her fingers cracked from detergent. It was watching the world teach her child to apologize for needing things. Air. Medicine. Answers. A name. After Ava fell asleep, Mariah stayed beside her for a long time, listening. The first hour after a bad breathing spell always frightened her. She counted the seconds between breaths. She watched the blanket rise and fall. Only when the rhythm steadied did she stand and take the blue folder from the kitchen drawer. She opened it on the table. Inside, beneath years of medical papers, was a smaller envelope, soft at the corners from being touched too often. Mariah did not open it every night. Some nights she had enough strength to leave the past where it was. This was not one of those nights. She slid out the old hospital bracelet first. Ava Whitmore Brooks. Newborn. 5 pounds 9 ounces. Then the first prescription label. Then a folded piece of paper from a prenatal visit. The back covered in handwriting she had memorized until memory became pain. Caleb's handwriting had leaned slightly to the right, impatient and alive. "If anything happens, tell my father she is ours." Mariah traced the sentence without touching it. 7 years and she had told him. She had tried. She had stood outside a brownstone in Lincoln Park with Ava wrapped in a yellow blanket and milk leaking through the front of her blouse because the baby was hungry and the security guard would not let her pass the gate. She had called numbers that stopped working. She had sent copies of documents that came back with no response. She had sat across from Vivian Shaw in a marble lobby, while the woman slid a check across the table and called it compassion. Mariah had pushed the check back. Not because she did not need money. She needed money desperately. She needed diapers, formula, rent, a stroller whose wheel did not jam every half block. But the check came with silence folded inside it, and silence was the one thing she refused to feed her daughter. So she had kept working, kept records, kept Ava's full name on every form even when clerks frowned, even when doctors paused, even when insurance representatives asked if Whitmore was really necessary. Yes, Mariah always said. It is necessary because it is true. Now Nathaniel Whitmore had seen the bottle. Not a lawyer. Not an assistant. Not a gatekeeper paid to make uncomfortable women disappear. Him. Caleb's father. The man whose family name opened hospital wings and closed doors with the same signature. Mariah folded the paper again and placed it back in the envelope. Her phone buzzed on the table, making her jump. Unknown number. She watched it ring until it stopped. A voicemail appeared. She did not play it. Not yet. Across the room, Ava breathed in her sleep, soft and uneven but steady. Mariah looked at the medicine bottle on the counter, then at the blue folder, then at the rain sliding down the dark window. Her goal had never been to become a Whitmore. It had never been a mansion, a headline, or a seat at some rich family's table. She wanted her daughter to breathe without a committee deciding whether she deserved air. She wanted Ava to grow up knowing her name was not a mistake. And if Nathaniel Whitmore wanted an answer now, Mariah would give him one eventually. But not in a pharmacy. Not in front of strangers. Not while holding pennies in her hand like evidence of failure. The next time a Whitmore asked why Ava carried that name, Mariah would make sure he heard the whole truth. And this time, nobody would be allowed to bury it for her. Nathaniel Whitmore did not go home after the pharmacy. His driver, Malcolm, held the back door of the black Lincoln open at the curb, rain purling on the roof, but Nate stood under the pharmacy awning with the small bottle of aspirin still unopened in his hand and looked down the street long after Mariah and Ava had disappeared into the mist. "Sir," Malcolm said gently. Nate blinked as if returning from somewhere far away. "Take me to the tower." Malcolm did not ask which tower. In Chicago, when people said Whitmore Tower, they meant the 42-story glass building near the river with the silver letters across the lobby wall and the private health clinic on the 6th floor, the foundation offices on the 19th, and the executive boardroom at the very top, where men and women in tailored suits decided what compassion would look like on paper. The city passed outside the tinted window in streaks of amber and red. Wet pavement. Late buses. Steam rising from manhole covers. A woman crossing the street with grocery bags hooked over both wrists. A delivery rider hunched against the colt. Nate saw all of it and felt the strange distance between looking at hardship and living close enough to be touched by it. For 28 years he had built an empire around medicine, hospitals, research grants, pediatric clinics, emergency relief funds, and smiling photographs of children whose names he almost never learned. Whitmore Health Network operated 12 hospitals across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, 37 outpatient clinics, for specialty pharmacies, and a foundation that had given away enough money to earn plaques, awards, magazine covers, and the kind of praise that made wealthy people sound morally necessary. Every December, Nate stood on a stage beneath soft lights and said children should never suffer because their parents were poor. People applauded. Cameras flashed. Donors wrote checks. The sentence had always sounded true when he said it into a microphone. It sounded different now with Mariah Brooks's voice behind it. Sorry does not open her lungs. The words followed him into the elevator, past the security desk, through the empty executive floor where the carpet swallowed his footsteps and the city glittered beyond glass walls. His office was larger than Mariah's entire apartment building lobby, though he did not know that. A walnut desk sat at the center, clean except for a bronze photograph frame turned slightly away from the door. He had not moved that frame in 7 years. He told himself it was because the picture hurt less from an angle. That was a lie. Nothing about Caleb hurt less. Caleb Whitmore had been 26 when he died, with his mother's easy smile and Nate's stubborn jaw, a young man who could walk into a room full of donors and spend the whole evening talking to the kitchen staff instead. He had hated speeches. He had hated the family habit of turning pain into charity and charity into reputation. You cannot keep building hospitals for people you would not invite to dinner, Caleb had once told him. Nate had dismissed it as youthful arrogance. He had been wrong about many things when it came to his son, but he had not known how many until a medicine bottle showed him a child with Caleb's eyes. Nate removed his coat and draped it over the chair. His watch caught the office light as he reached for the photograph. In it, Caleb stood beside him at a foundation gala, tuxedo collar slightly crooked, grin too real for the room. Nate remembered being irritated that night because Caleb had left early without explanation. He remembered the argument that came 2 weeks later. A woman, Caleb had said. A baby maybe. Nate had not let him finish. He had heard threat where there was confession. He had heard recklessness where there might have been love. The Whitmore name attracted opportunists, he had said. People would use anything to get close. Caleb had looked at him then with something colder than anger. Disappointment. You built a whole foundation for families you still do not trust, he had said. That was the last full conversation they ever had. After the funeral, responsibility became Nate's religion. He expanded the pediatric wing. He renamed grants. He funded research in Caleb's memory. He became the grieving father America could admire because admired grief did not require anyone to ask what he had refused to hear while his son was alive. The public version of Nathaniel Whitmore was measured, generous, disciplined, almost mythic. He could calm a boardroom with one raised hand. He could move $200 million before breakfast. He could call a governor, a chief surgeon, a university president, and be answered before the second ring. Yet inside his own company, rules carried his signature into places his conscience had never walked. Eligibility standards, identity verification, fraud prevention protocols, prior authorization requirements, charitable assistance categories. Words polished until no one could hear the doors closing behind them. Nate had approved most of them. Not because he wanted to hurt anyone. That was the defense powerful men loved most. He had approved them because advisors said the foundation needed guardrails. Because attorneys warned him that wealthy families were targets. Because one scandal could damage donor trust. Because compassion, they said, had to be protected from abuse. So they built a system to protect compassion, and somewhere inside that system, a 6-year-old girl named Ava Whitmore Brooks had been asked to prove she deserved medicine. Nate sat behind his desk, opened his laptop, and entered the administrator portal for Whitmore Health Foundation. The screen asked for two-factor authentication. His phone buzzed. He typed the code. The dashboard appeared, neat and sterile. Annual giving, emergency grants approved, applications pending, pediatric medication assistance, denials by category. Numbers in blue and gray. Lives disguised as rectangles. He searched for Brooks. Nothing. He searched for Ava. Too many results. He typed Whitmore Brooks. The system paused longer than it should have, then returned a restricted file notice. Access limited. Routed to legal review. Nate leaned closer. His own name was on the building, but a child's file had a wall around it he could not cross without another department's permission. He clicked Request Access. A box opened asking for reason. He stared at it. Because I saw her mother counting pennies. Because my son called me on March 14th and I did not answer. Because a little girl has my family's name on a prescription bottle. And I do not know whether that name has protected her or punished her. He typed only, Executive Review. The request submitted. Less than 2 minutes later, his office phone rang. Only a handful of people had that line. Nate let it ring twice before answering. Nathaniel, said Vivian Shaw, smooth and alert, as if she had been awake waiting for a problem to become official. Vivian had served as chief legal officer for Whitmore Health Foundation for 11 years. She was precise, elegant, and trusted by every board member who preferred problems to arrive already sanitized. She had handled Caleb's estate. She had handled the press after the accident. She had handled the uncomfortable claims that surfaced whenever a famous family lost a son, and people came forward with stories. Nate had been grateful for her then. Grateful men are often careless with power. Why is a pediatric medication file with the name Ava Whitmore Brooks restricted? He asked. There was the smallest silence. Not long enough to accuse. Long enough to remember. That file has a sensitive designation, Vivian said. I saw that. Then you understand why it should not be opened casually. I did not ask casually. Her voice softened by half a degree. which meant she was choosing a strategy. Nathaniel, there have been individuals over the years who attempted to attach themselves to the Whitmore name. Some cases were confused. Some were opportunistic. Some were painful. We created procedures to protect the family and the foundation. Is the child sick? Another pause. I would need to review the medical privacy boundaries before discussing details. That is not what I asked. I am telling you this carefully because I care about you. Nate looked at Caleb's photograph. The crooked collar. The open smile. Do not care about me by hiding a child. The line went quiet in a different way now. Vivian understood tone. She understood when grief was no longer passive. I will come in first thing tomorrow, she said. We can go through the history properly. Send me the access tonight. I do not recommend that. I did not ask for a recommendation. Outside his windows, Chicago stretched in every direction, bright and indifferent. Somewhere south of there, Mariah Brooks was probably laying out clothes for another workday, checking her daughter's breathing, deciding which bill could survive being ignored. Nate had once believed responsibility meant building institutions large enough to outlive him. Now he wondered if he had built something large enough to hide the truth in plain sight. He ended the call without saying good night. For a long moment he sat still. Then he opened the lower drawer of his desk and took out an old leather notebook Caleb had left behind after their last argument. Nate had never read past the first page. He had been afraid of finding anger. He had been more afraid of finding forgiveness. Tonight he opened it. Several pages were filled with sketches, names, fragments of plans for a community clinic Caleb wanted to start. One where patients would not need to prove pain in triplicate before receiving help. Near the back, between two blank pages, Nate found a sentence underlined twice. A system does not have to hate people to harm them. It only has to stop seeing them. Nate read it once. Then again. Then he turned back to the computer screen, where the restricted file notice still waited like a locked door with his family name engraved on it. By morning he would learn who had built that door. But the question already forming in his chest was worse than that. If Ava had been kept outside the Whitmore name for 6 years, how many other children had been kept outside help by rules he was too powerful to notice? By 7:40 the next morning, Mariah Brooks had already washed 2 loads of pediatric sheets, signed a late slip for Ava at the school office, and reheated coffee in a paper cup 3 times without finishing it. The day had begun at 5:15 with the radiator coughing cold air, Ava's inhaler placed carefully in the front pocket of her backpack, and the blue folder hidden inside Mariah's tote beneath her work shoes. She had not planned to bring the folder. She had stood at the kitchen table for almost a full minute with her hand on it, listening to Ava hum softly while tying her sneakers. Then she remembered Nathaniel Whitmore's face in the pharmacy. Not pity. Not annoyance. Recognition. That frightened her more than disbelief. Disbelief she knew how to fight. Recognition opened doors, and doors could lead anywhere. At St. Agnes Medical Center, the laundry room sat 2 floors below the main lobby, past a service corridor where the walls were painted the color of oatmeal and the air always carried the heavy warmth of industrial dryers. Mariah clocked in at 6:02, 2 minutes late because the bus had idled behind a sanitation truck on 35th Street. Her supervisor, Mr. Harlan, looked at the timestamp, looked at her and said nothing. That was his kindness. Mariah tied on a gray apron, pulled her hair back, and began feeding sheets into the press with the practiced rhythm of someone whose body knew the work even while her mind stood somewhere else entirely. Every white sheet entered wrinkled and damp. Every white sheet came out flat, hot, and perfect enough for patients upstairs who would never know the woman who had touched it. She preferred it that way most days. Invisible work meant fewer questions. Fewer questions meant fewer chances for someone to decide she was a problem. At 9:18, her phone buzzed inside her locker. She ignored it because phones were not allowed on the floor. At 9:24, it buzzed again. At 9:31, Mr. Harlan opened the laundry room door and called over the noise of the machines. "Brooks, someone from administration is asking for you." Every woman in the room looked up. Administration did not come downstairs unless something had gone wrong. Mariah wiped her hands on her apron. What kind of administration? Mr. Harlan's eyes shifted toward the hallway. The kind in a suit. She knew before she saw him. Nathaniel Whitmore stood beyond the service doors wearing a navy overcoat and no expression he knew what to do with. He looked different under hospital lights than he had in the pharmacy. Less like a man stepping briefly into someone else's emergency. More like the owner of the walls. Behind him stood a younger woman with a tablet, and beside him, half a step back, a security employee who looked embarrassed to be there. Mariah stopped walking. The laundry room kept moving behind her, machines turning, steam rising, sheets snapping into shape. Two worlds had met at a pharmacy counter the night before. Now one of them had followed the other underground. Ms. Brooks, Nate said. He did not use her first name. That mattered. I am sorry to interrupt your shift. Mariah looked at the assistant, then at the security employee, then back at him. Then do not. The assistant's eyes flickered. Nate accepted the blow without blinking. I tried calling. I was working. I understand. No, Mariah said quietly. You know the definition of working. That is not the same thing. The words hung in the service corridor between the hot air and the hum of pipes. Nate lowered his gaze for a second, not in shame exactly, but in acknowledgement. He had spent his life around people who softened sentences before handing them to him. Mariah did not soften anything. You are right, he said. That surprised her, but not enough to move. I need to ask you about Ava. Mariah's face changed at her daughter's name. All the fatigue disappeared. In its place came something clean and hard. My daughter is at school. I know. Why do you know that? The security employee shifted uncomfortably. Nate turned his head. Leave us. The assistant hesitated. Mr. Whitmore, Vivian said you should not have any private conversation without counsel present. Leave us, he repeated. This time they did. The door closed, and the corridor became smaller. Mariah folded her arms. Not defensive. Measured. If your lawyer sent you, you can tell her I still have the same answer. Nate was quiet. What answer? Mariah studied him then. Really studied him. The silver at his temples. The expensive coat. The grief sitting behind his eyes like a room with the lights off. For the first time she wondered how much he knew and how much had been kept from him. That made her angrier somehow. Rich people could afford not to know. Poor people paid for every unknown thing in fees, denials, and sleepless nights. I am not signing anything, she said. I am not changing Ava's name. I am not taking money to pretend her father did not exist. And I am not letting your family turn my child into a clerical mistake, because the truth is inconvenient. Nate's hand closed slowly around the leather folder he was carrying. Her father was Caleb? Mariah did not answer. One of the dryers clicked off behind the wall, leaving a sudden pocket of quiet. Nate heard his own breathing in it. Please, he said, and the word came out differently than he intended. Not like command. Not like charity. Like a man arriving too late at a door he should have opened years ago. Mariah looked away first. Not because she was weak. Because his voice had touched a place she had spent years boarding shut. Do you know what Caleb gave me the first time Ava needed medicine? She asked. Nate shook his head. Mariah reached into her tote bag and pulled out the blue folder. She did not hand it to him. She opened it herself, there in the corridor outside the laundry room, with lint floating in the air and hospital carts rattling somewhere above them. From inside, she removed a faded prescription receipt folded along the same creases so many times it felt soft as cloth. He wrote on the back because we did not have any clean paper in the waiting room. She turned it around. Nate did not touch it. He only looked. The handwriting hit him before the words did. Caleb's handwriting. The quick slant. The uneven pressure. The careless loop on the letter F. If anything happens, tell my father she is ours. The corridor tilted. Nate reached for the wall, not dramatically, just enough to steady himself. Mariah noticed. Of course she noticed. Mothers noticed the smallest changes because small changes were how emergencies announced themselves. I did tell someone, she said. 3 weeks after Caleb was gone. I came to your house with Ava in a yellow blanket. A woman named Vivian Shaw met me at the gate. Nate's mouth tightened. What did she say? Mariah gave a small smile without warmth. She said grief makes people imagine connections. She said Caleb had many friends. She said if I cared about my daughter, I would not drag her into a family that would only hurt her. Then she offered me a check with a confidentiality agreement clipped to it. Nate closed his eyes. For 1 second he was not a billionaire. He was a father hearing the echo of his own absence. Did you take it? He asked, though he already knew. Mariah's chin lifted. I took the bus home. The simple sentence did more damage than accusation could have. Nate saw it. A young mother sore from childbirth, carrying a newborn through a city that did not pause for her, holding a rejected truth in one hand and a diaper bag in the other. I did not know, he said. Mariah folded the receipt back along its old lines. That must be comfortable. He flinched. She did not apologize. I am not saying that to be cruel, she continued. I am saying it because people like you are always not knowing. Your lawyers do things. Your boards do things. Your policies do things. And then mothers like me stand at counters counting pennies while everyone explains why nobody personally meant harm. Nate looked at the hospital badge clipped to her apron. Mariah Brooks. Laundry Services. Under it, a small sticker Ava had placed there that morning, a gold star slightly crooked. He thought of the foundation reports upstairs, the smiling photographs, the phrase Pediatric Access Initiative printed in clean blue letters. He thought of the restricted file. Route to legal. He thought of Vivian's voice saying sensitive designation. Last night, he said carefully, Ava's prescription was denied because of prior authorization. It is always something. That medicine is distributed through a Whitmore pharmacy contract. I know. You know. Mariah looked at him as if the question itself revealed the problem. Mothers learn who is standing between their child and what they need. She placed the blue folder back into her tote. Your name is on the hospital. Your name is on the pharmacy card. Your name is on the foundation letterhead that rejected Ava twice before I stopped applying. So yes, Mr. Whitmore, I know. A cart rolled past at the far end of the corridor, pushed by an orderly who slowed when he recognized Nate, then quickly looked away. Nate waited until the wheels faded. I want to help her. Then change the price. I can do more than that. That is what worries me. He looked at her confused. Mariah stepped closer, lowering her voice so no one else could collect pieces of their daughter's life from the hallway. Ava is not a public relations problem. She is not proof that you are a good man. She is not a second chance wrapped in a little girl so you can feel forgiven by your son. She is 6. She likes spelling tests, strawberry yogurt, and putting socks on the wrong feet because she says they feel luckier that way. If you come near her, you come with the truth. Not money first. Not cameras. Not lawyers. Truth. Nate held her gaze. For years, people had asked him for money, access, favors, forgiveness by association. No one had ever made truth the condition of entry. Then tell me where to start, he said. Mariah almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the man who owned floors above her was standing in the basement asking for directions. She reached into the folder one more time and removed something smaller. Ava's old newborn hospital bracelet sealed in a sandwich bag to protect the ink. She held it up but did not let go. The bracelet was tiny, almost weightless, with Ava's name printed in letters beginning to fade. Ava Whitmore Brooks. Newborn. 5 pounds 9 ounces. Date of birth March 14th. Nate stared at it, and the date moved through him like a locked memory opening from the inside. March 14th. 11 missed calls. Caleb's final voicemail he had deleted without listening because grief had made him foolish and pride had made him cruel. Mariah saw recognition strike him again. This time she did not protect him from it. That night means something to you, she said. Nate nodded once. Caleb called me. He called me too, Mariah said. From outside your building. He said he was going upstairs to fix everything. Nate's eyes lifted sharply. Outside my building? That is what he said. The question formed in both of them at the same time, though neither spoke it fully. If Caleb had been outside Whitmore Tower that night, if he had come to tell the truth, then why had Nate never been told he arrived? Before Nate could ask, the service door opened. Vivian Shaw stepped into the corridor in a cream coat untouched by the weather, her expression calm enough to be mistaken for kindness. Nathaniel, she said, then looked at Mariah as if finding her there confirmed a suspicion. Miss Brooks. I think this conversation should pause until everyone has proper representation. Mariah's fingers closed around the hospital bracelet. Nate turned slowly toward Vivian. The basement lights hummed above them. Steam moved through the pipes. Somewhere upstairs, the Whitmore name shone in polished metal across the lobby wall. Down here, the same name sat fading on a newborn bracelet in a mother's hand. And for the first time, Nathaniel Whitmore understood that the collision between his world and Mariah's had not happened by accident. Someone had spent 6 years making sure it never happened at all. Vivian Shaw did not raise her voice in the basement corridor. She did not need to. Some people carried authority like a badge. Vivian carried it like a locked file cabinet, quiet, polished, and difficult to move. She looked from Nathaniel Whitmore to Mariah Brooks, then to the small plastic bag in Mariah's hand, where Ava's newborn bracelet sat like evidence rescued from a flood. "This is not the proper setting," Vivian said. Mariah gave a tired little nod. "Funny. That is what people always say when the truth shows up somewhere they cannot control." Vivian's eyes touched Mariah for half a second, then moved back to Nate as if Mariah were not the person in the hallway with the child, the records, and the history. "Nathaniel, you are grieving. You saw a name last night, and now emotions are doing what emotions do. They are connecting things that may not be connected." Nate turned toward her slowly. "How did you know what I saw last night?" For the first time, Vivian paused. It was brief, almost invisible, but Mariah saw it. Mothers saw pauses. Poor people saw pauses. Anyone who had ever been denied something important by a person behind a desk learned to study the tiny space between question and answer. "You submitted an executive access request," Vivian said. The restricted file included a prescription reference. The request did not mention the pharmacy. Vivian smiled without warmth. "The system logs more than you think." Mariah slipped the hospital bracelet back into the blue folder. She had heard enough. "I need to get back to work." Nate looked at her. "Miss Brooks." "No," she said, not sharply, but with exhaustion so complete. It sounded almost calm. "You two can decide upstairs how to describe what happened down here. I have sheets waiting, a child to pick up at 3, and a bus that does not care who your lawyers are." She stepped around them. Vivian did not move at first. Nate did. He stepped aside, giving Mariah the space Vivian had not. Mariah passed him without looking up, but as she reached the service door, she stopped. "If you want to know what happened, do not start with me," she said. "Start with the file that keeps disappearing." Then she pushed through the door, and the heat and noise of the laundry room swallowed her again. Nate watched the door close. Vivian waited until it did. "She is practiced," she said. Nate's eyes remained on the door. "At what?" "Making a story feel undeniable." He turned then. "Careful. I am being careful. That is what you pay me for. I pay you to protect the foundation. And the family. The family may include that child." Vivian's expression softened into something almost sorrowful, the kind of expression powerful people used when preparing to do harm gently. "Nathaniel, I have seen this before. When a family has your level of visibility, grief attracts people. Some are confused. Some are desperate. Some are opportunistic. Ms. Brooks may believe what she is saying. That does not make it true." Nate looked at the door again. Behind it, machines thundered, and somewhere inside that noise, Mariah had returned to work as if her entire life had not just been debated in a hallway. "Then open the file." Vivian folded her hands around the tablet she carried. "Not here. Not like this. There are privacy restrictions, estate implications, and foundation governance rules. If you force access outside protocol, anything we find could become legally compromised." It sounded reasonable. That was Vivian's gift. She could wrap a locked door in enough correct language that people thanked her for keeping them outside. Nate had trusted that gift for years. At 10:15 he followed her upstairs. Not to the executive suite, where everything smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, but to a smaller conference room on the administrative floor of St. Agnes. Vivian chose the room. Nate noticed that. No windows facing patient areas. No staff passing by. Frosted glass. A speakerphone in the center of the table. 2 chairs placed too far apart. She had already prepared a folder. Paper, not digital. That also meant something. "This is the preliminary record," she said, sliding it toward him. Nate did not open it immediately. You had it ready. I anticipated you would ask. Before I asked? After your access request. He opened the folder. The first page was a summary, clean and concise. Name, Ava Brooks. Mother, Mariah Brooks. Alleged paternal connection. Unverified. Assistance applications. Incomplete documentation. Legal review status. Closed pending additional evidence. Nate read the words once. Then again. Alleged. Unverified. Incomplete. Closed. Each word carried a little blade hidden under its smooth surface. Where is Whitmore? He asked. Vivian looked at the page. The child's legal surname appears inconsistently across submitted documents. That is not what I asked. In the foundation system, the Whitmore designation was flagged as unsupported. Nate turned the page. Copies of forms. Denial notices. Requests for paternal confirmation. A note from a caseworker saying the mother became emotional when asked to remove the disputed surname from the application. Another note saying applicant refused settlement communication. Another saying possible reputational risk if escalated. He stopped there. Reputational risk to whom? Vivian did not answer quickly enough. To the foundation. A sick child was a reputational risk? A claim involving Caleb's name was a reputational risk. The name landed between them. Caleb. For 7 years, Nate had heard it spoken carefully, lowered like something fragile. Vivian said it like a category. Why was I never told? He asked. Vivian sat across from him, tablet now dark in front of her. Because there was no verified claim to tell you about. She came to my house. She came to the gate. With a newborn. With an allegation. Nate pushed the folder back an inch. That is my granddaughter you may be calling an allegation. Vivian leaned forward. Or she may not be. And until that is established through proper channels, my obligation is to prevent you from being emotionally manipulated into making a decision that could expose the foundation, the estate, and every patient assistance program we operate. Do not use patience as a shield. I am using reality as a shield. The speakerphone lit up before Nate could respond. Vivian had scheduled someone. Of course she had. A man's voice filled the room, older, cautious, familiar. Vivian, I am on. Nate's jaw tightened. Dr. Ellison? Dr. Peter Ellison had been Caleb's physician for years. A discreet concierge doctor with silver hair, steady hands, and the polished unease of a man who had spent his career near wealthy secrets. Nathaniel, he said, sounding surprised and not surprised at all. I was told there were renewed questions regarding an old matter. Nate looked at Vivian. You called him. He was involved in reviewing some of the early documentation, Vivian said. Nate leaned toward the phone. Did Caleb ever tell you he was expecting a child? Silence. Not long. Long enough. Caleb mentioned a relationship, Dr. Ellison said. He did not provide me with verified medical documentation of paternity. That is not an answer. It is the answer I can give responsibly. Vivian spoke before Nate could. Doctor, did the foundation ever receive a completed paternity confirmation package from Ms. Brooks? Not to my knowledge, Dr. Ellison said. Nate heard the phrase. Not to my knowledge. The favorite hallway between truth and denial. Did Caleb request any test? Any appointment? Anything connected to Mariah Brooks? Another pause. This one had weight. There was a consultation request, Dr. Ellison said. Vivian's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. It was preliminary, she said. Let him answer, Nate said. Dr. Ellison cleared his throat. A private laboratory appointment was discussed. I do not recall whether it was completed. Discussed with whom? Nate asked. Caleb. The room changed. Not visibly. The chairs remained still. The table remained polished. Vivian remained composed. But a seam had opened. When? Nate asked. Dr. Ellison exhaled softly through the phone. Early. March. 7 years ago. Early March. Before the calls. Before the accident. Before Mariah at the gate. Nate felt the date moving toward him like a storm. Was there a file? He asked. There may have been an intake record. Where is it? Vivian said, "Old intake records are purged according to retention schedules unless attached to an active case." Nate looked at her. "You said the file was closed pending additional evidence." "That is correct." "So which is it? Purged or closed?" Vivian held his gaze. "Both can be true depending on the document category." It was a perfect answer. Meaningless and impossible to hold. Nate stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the carpet. "I want the audit trail." Vivian's face cooled. "Nathaniel. Every login. Every edit. Every routing note. Every document attached and removed. I want the metadata." "That requires information governance approval." "Then approve it." "I cannot approve an audit into my own department." "Then I will." He walked out before she could stop him. By noon, Nate was in the information systems office on the 4th floor, standing behind a nervous director named Priya Nair, while she pulled up archived logs under executive authorization. Priya did not want to be involved. That much was clear from the way she kept adjusting her glasses and reminding him that old records could be incomplete. Nate told her incomplete was better than invisible. The first search showed Ava Brooks. 6 applications. 6 denials. The second search showed Ava Whitmore Brooks. 3 restricted records. 1 active flag. 2 archived references. The third search, Caleb Whitmore plus Mariah Brooks, produced nothing. Priya relaxed for half a second. Then Nate remembered the prescription receipt. "Search Caleb by date," he said. "March 1st through March 14th, 7 years ago. Include lab vendors." Priya typed. Results appeared slowly. Calendar entries. Billing codes. Canceled appointments. Then one line near the bottom. External genetics consultation pending. Client initials, C.W. Dependent reference, F.B. Maternal reference, M.V. Nate felt the air leave the room. "Open it." Priya clicked. "Access denied. Legal hold. Vivian Shaw." The name appeared in the authorization field like a signature pressed into wet cement. Nate did not speak. Priya whispered, "I have never seen a legal hold on a pending lab intake this old. Can you see who placed it?" "Yes." She clicked the log. Vivian had placed the hold 6 years and 11 months ago, 2 days after Mariah said she came to the gate. There were later access events too. One at midnight 3 years ago. One 11 months ago. One last night, 16 minutes after Nate's pharmacy purchase was recorded in the system. Last night, Vivian had not reacted to his access request alone. She had gone into the file after he saw the bottle. "Print this," Nate said. Priya hesitated. "Sir, this is sensitive." That word is starting to sound like a place where truth goes to die. She printed it. Downstairs, Mariah spent her lunch break in the employee locker room with a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and her phone balanced on her knee. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. 1 voicemail. She played it with the volume low. Nathaniel Whitmore's voice came through, careful and strained. "Ms. Brooks, I found a reference to a lab appointment connected to Caleb. I do not have the full truth yet, but I believe someone prevented me from seeing part of it. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking for permission to keep looking." Mariah stared at the lockers across from her. Dented metal painted pale green. Around her, women opened lunch containers, laughed softly, complained about supervisors called children, checked bus schedules. Ordinary life continued because ordinary life always continued, even when the past started knocking. Her first feeling was not relief. It was suspicion. Relief was dangerous. Relief made people lower the shield too soon. She replayed the message once. Then a second time. Permission to keep looking. Not permission to help. Not permission to fix. Looking was different. Looking meant there was something hidden. Looking meant maybe she had not imagined the locked doors. Maybe the file had disappeared because someone powerful had wanted it gone. Before she could decide whether to call back, a text arrived. From Ava's school. "Please call nurse regarding inhaler paperwork." Mariah closed her eyes. The world never gave one emergency the courtesy of finishing before sending the next. On the 4th floor, Nate stood alone near the printer, holding the audit log. It did not prove Ava was Caleb's daughter. Not yet. It did not prove Vivian had lied about everything. Not yet. It did not prove Mariah's story in full. But it proved one thing clearly enough to make his hands go cold. Someone had treated a child's existence like a legal threat before anyone had treated her like family. And somewhere inside a restricted archive, behind Vivian Shaw's name and a 7-year-old legal hold, there was a missing document that could explain why Caleb's final truth had never reached his father. Mariah did not call Nathaniel Whitmore back during lunch. She wanted to. Her thumb hovered over the number twice. Once while the school nurse explained that Ava's inhaler authorization form needed a physician's signature again. And once while Mr. Harlan reminded everyone that the linen carts for the 4th floor were behind schedule. But wanting had never been a safe reason for Mariah to do anything. Wanting made people step into rooms where the floor had already been removed. Wanting made young women believe a man's family would listen because the truth was obvious. Wanting made a mother carry a newborn to a gate in Lincoln Park and stand there with milk staining her blouse while a security guard looked through her as if she were weather. So Mariah put the phone away. She finished her shift. She picked up Ava from school at 3:28, late enough that Ava was sitting with the front office secretary coloring a worksheet, but not late enough to be marked abandoned, a distinction Mariah knew because she knew every thin line the world drew around mothers like her. Ava looked up and smiled with 2 missing teeth and 1 pink barrette sliding down the side of her hair. "Mama, I got 8 out of 10 on spelling." "That sounds like a celebration number," Mariah said, even though there was nothing in her pocket to celebrate with except a half-pack of gum and a transfer card with 1 ride left. They walked to the bus stop under a sky the color of wet concrete. Ava talked about the spelling words first, then about Madison's new light-up shoes, then about the nurse asking if her chest felt tight. Mariah listened to every word, but behind the listening, another voice kept replaying. "I found a reference to a lab appointment connected to Caleb. Not proof. Not truth. A reference. A small thing." But Mariah had survived for years on small things. A prescription receipt. A hospital bracelet. A folded note. A name she refused to erase. The bus was crowded, so Mariah stood with one hand gripping the pole, and the other holding Ava steady against her coat. 3 stops in, Ava leaned her head against Mariah's hip, tired from the kind of day children should not have to measure by how much air they had left. Mariah looked through the fogged window at Chicago sliding past in gray pieces, and without meaning to, she fell back 7 years, to the first time Caleb Whitmore had learned her name. It had been late summer then, the kind of Chicago heat that rose from sidewalks and made the air above parked cars shimmer. Mariah was 24, working the lunch shift in the cafeteria at Whitmore Children's Hospital, wearing a hairnet, a black polo shirt, and shoes that squeaked when the floor had just been mopped. Caleb came through the line carrying a tray he did not seem to want, looking less like the heir to a medical empire than a man who had forgotten why he walked into the room. He asked for coffee. Mariah told him the machine was broken. He asked if there was another one. She pointed to the staff pot behind the counter and said, "That one tastes like burnt tires and regret, but it is technically coffee." He laughed so suddenly that the nurse behind him smiled. The next day he came back and asked for the burnt tires and regret. The third day he brought a pack of real coffee beans and asked if bribery was allowed. Mariah told him only if he learned how to wipe down his own table. He did. That was the first thing she noticed about him. Not the watch. Not the last name stitched into the visitor badge. The fact that he wiped the table. Wealthy people, she had learned, were often very kind in theory and very careless with objects other people had to clean. Caleb was not careless. He returned trays. He said thank you to the dishroom staff by name. He carried 2 coffees and gave the better one away. A month passed before he told her who his father was. By then, Mariah had already told him she was taking night classes for medical billing, because she wanted a job where sitting down did not feel like stealing time. She had told him her mother died when she was 19, that she had no family in the city except an aunt in Milwaukee who called on holidays and sent prayers because money was harder to send. Caleb had told her his mother left when he was young, not gone from the world, just gone from the house, and that his father filled silence with buildings. They became friends in the cafeteria first, then in the little courtyard behind the hospital where employees went to eat lunch when the weather behaved, then on walks to the train station, then in conversations that stretched past midnight while Mariah sat on the floor of her studio apartment folding laundry and Caleb sat in some expensive apartment with too much glass behind him, both of them pretending the distance between their lives was just a detail. He never made poverty feel like a performance. He never said she was strong in that tone people used when they meant they were glad not to be her. When her check came up short because payroll forgot 8 overtime hours, he did not offer to fix it with money. He sat with her on the phone for 46 minutes while she waited for human resources, listening while she insisted on what she had earned. Afterward he said, "You scare people who are used to being believed automatically." She said, "Good." He said, "Good." Love did not arrive like lightning. It arrived like someone remembering that she hated onions on sandwiches. It arrived like Caleb keeping crackers in his car because Mariah forgot to eat on double shifts. It arrived like her letting him into the parts of her life that were not polished for guests. The bathroom sink that dripped, the neighbor upstairs who stomped at midnight, the envelope system she used to divide. Rent, groceries, transit, and emergencies, though emergencies always ate first. When Mariah found out she was pregnant, she took 3 tests in the restroom of a Walgreens, then sat on the closed toilet lid holding them in both hands until a woman knocked and asked if she was all right. She was not all right. She was terrified. She was 25, uninsured between jobs, renting a room from a cousin's friend, and carrying a child connected to a family whose name was on hospital wings. Caleb found her that evening in the courtyard behind the hospital, sitting on the low brick wall beside the planter where the flowers had started to wilt. She did not give him a speech. She handed him the test wrapped in a paper towel. He looked at it, then at her, and the first thing he said was, "Are you okay?" Not "Is it mine?" Not "What are we going to do?" "Are you okay?" That was why she cried. Not hard. Just enough to hate herself for doing it in public. Caleb sat beside her and did not touch her until she leaned into him first. "We will figure it out," he said. Mariah wanted to believe him. For a little while she did. Caleb went to appointments when he could, wearing baseball caps low on his forehead, because he said he did not want staff treating her differently if they recognized him. He kept ultrasound pictures in the glove compartment of his car, and one tucked behind his driver's license. At 12 weeks, when the baby looked more like a promise than a person, he stared at the blurry image and whispered, "She is real." Mariah said, "You do not know it is a girl." He said, "I know she is real." They argued about the Whitmore name. Mariah did not want it if it came with shame. Caleb said the baby deserved every part of where she came from, including the parts his father might not know how to receive. He believed Nate would come around if he could see the child as a child and not as a threat. Mariah was less sure. She had seen how institutions looked at women like her when they entered carrying stories that complicated wealthy rooms. Caleb understood that his family had power. He did not fully understand what power felt like from the other side of a locked gate. But he tried. That was the thing Mariah could never make herself forget. He tried. In early March, when Mariah was close to the end of her pregnancy and Ava had begun pressing a small foot under her ribs every evening like she was knocking from the inside, Caleb arranged a private consultation for genetic testing after birth. Not because he doubted Mariah. Because he knew his father's world respected documents more than people. "I hate that we need proof," he told her in the hospital cafeteria after hours, when the chairs were flipped onto tables and the vending machines hummed in the corner. "Then do not ask me to be grateful for it," she said. "I am not." He took a receipt from her prenatal visit because neither of them had paper, turned it over, and wrote the sentence she would carry for the next 7 years. "If anything happens, tell my father she is ours." Mariah had laughed then softly because nothing was supposed to happen. People wrote dramatic things when they were scared. Caleb tucked the receipt into her folder and said, "Friday. I am telling him Friday." Friday was March 14th. That morning Mariah woke with Ava coming early. Not dangerously early, just early enough to turn every plan into motion. Caleb was across town at Whitmore Tower, trying to meet Nate before an emergency board session. He called Mariah twice between contractions. "I am going upstairs," he said the second time, breathless from walking fast. "I am done waiting." Mariah told him not to fight. He said, "This is not a fight. It is my daughter." She remembered that sentence more clearly than she remembered the delivery room lights. "It is my daughter." Then the nurse took her phone because it kept slipping from her hand, and the world narrowed to pain, breath, pressure, voices, and the astonishing cry of a 5-pound, 9-ounce baby girl who arrived with fists clenched as if already prepared to argue her case. Caleb never walked into the room. At first, Mariah thought he was delayed. Then she thought his phone died. Then a nurse with careful eyes came in and asked if there was anyone she could call. The accident had happened near the river during the morning rush after Caleb left Whitmore Tower but before he reached the hospital. Not violent in the way television makes things violent. Just sudden. A city moment.
Wet pavement.
A vehicle that did not stop in time. A life interrupted between one truth and the person who needed to hear it. Mariah held Ava against her chest when they told her. The baby rooted blindly, hungry and alive, while the father she would never meet became a past tense before her name bracelet had even warmed to her skin. For 3 weeks, grief made Mariah move like she was underwater. She fed Ava. Changed Ava. Held Ava through nights when the baby cried and Mariah cried quieter. Bills arrived. Condolences did not, because no one in Caleb's family knew what she was to him. Or if they knew, no one came. Finally, with Ava wrapped in a yellow blanket and the folder pressed under one arm, Mariah took 2 buses to Lincoln Park. The Whitmore house stood behind iron gates, stone-faced and silent, with hedges trimmed so evenly they looked unreal. She told the guard her name. She told him she needed to speak to Nathaniel Whitmore about Caleb. The guard made a call. Mariah waited 32 minutes because she watched the time on the phone Caleb had helped her buy. Then Vivian Shaw came out. Not Nate. Vivian. Her coat was camel-colored. Her shoes did not touch the wet patches on the sidewalk because she stepped around them with practiced ease. She looked at Ava, then at Mariah, then at the folder. "Mr. Whitmore is not receiving visitors," she said. Mariah said, "This is his granddaughter." Vivian's face did not change. That was the most frightening part. No shock. No confusión. Just a door closing from the inside. She invited Mariah into a side office near the gatehouse, not the house. There was a chair, a glass desk, a box of tissues placed where grieving people could reach them, and no warmth anywhere. Vivian listened for less than 5 minutes before sliding a check across the desk. $10,000. More money than Mariah had ever seen made out to her name. Beside it was a document with words like confidentiality, non-disparagement, and release of future claims. Mariah did not understand every legal phrase, but she understood the shape of the offer. Money in exchange for making Ava smaller. Money in exchange for removing Caleb from the story. Money in exchange for allowing rich people to grieve without being inconvenienced by the life he left behind. "I do not want your money," Mariah said. Vivian folded her hands. "This is support." "No. Support does not come with a gag order." Vivian's voice stayed gentle. "Ms. Brooks, grief can create certainty where there is none." Caleb was kind. He had many relationships. "You are a new mother under stress. I am trying to prevent you from entering a situation that will hurt you and your child." Mariah stood with Ava in her arms. The baby made a small sound against her shoulder. "Her name is Ava Whitmore Brooks." Vivian looked at the folder. "I would strongly advise you to use Brooks only. It will make things easier." Mariah remembered every inch of that room. The silver pen. The white orchids. The check on the desk. The way Vivian said easier as if ease had ever been offered to her without a trap attached. "I am not interested in easier," Mariah said. "I am interested in true." She left the check there. On the bus home, Ava woke and cried from hunger. Mariah did not have a bottle ready because she had expected to be inside long enough to prepare one. She sat in the back row, shielding herself with her coat while strangers looked away in that embarrassed public way people do when motherhood becomes visible. She had $13 in her account, stitches still healing, and a newborn with a name half the world was already trying to erase. That night, she wrote down everything Vivian had said. The date, the time, the color of the coat, the exact amount on the check. She put the notes in the blue folder. Then she added the unsigned agreement Vivian's assistant had accidentally left in the envelope. She did not know yet that this folder would become her second spine, the thing she carried when her own strength bent. The years after that were not one long tragedy. Mariah refused to let them be. There were good mornings. Ava's first laugh, bright and surprised, while Mariah bounced a sock puppet over her crib. Ava's first steps across the apartment floor toward a plastic cup. Ava at 3 naming every bus by color. Ava at 4 putting stickers on Mariah's lunch bag because working people deserve decorations too. But beneath every joy ran the same current. Forms where the father's section became a battlefield. Clinics where receptionists paused at the last name. Insurance calls where representatives asked for documentation Mariah did not have access to because the people with access had locked it away. When Ava's breathing problems began, first as a winter cough, then as emergency visits, then as prescriptions and specialists and words Mariah had to learn, the Whitmore name became both truth and obstacle. The foundation rejected her applications because paternity was unverified. The pharmacy discount program flagged the surname. A hospital billing clerk once told her it might be simpler to remove Whitmore from Ava's records. Mariah had looked at the woman through the glass partition and said, "Simpler for who?" That was how she arrived at the present. Not through laziness, not through bad choices, not through some dramatic collapse, but through 6 years of small doors closing. A missed signature. A denied refill. A bus running late. A job without paid leave. A legal department that treated a child like a risk category. A mother keeping receipts because receipts were the only witnesses she could afford. That evening, after the voicemail from Nate and the text from the school nurse, Mariah took Ava home and made rice with the last egg stirred through it. Ava did homework at the table, her tongue tucked between her teeth as she wrote spelling words in careful pencil. Mariah watched her write her full name at the top of the page. Ava Whitmore Brooks. The letters were uneven. The truth was not. "Mama," Ava said, "why do grown-ups care so much about names?" Mariah folded a clean shirt from the laundry basket. "Because names tell them where to put people." "Where do they put me?" Mariah crossed the room and kissed the top of her head. "With me." Ava smiled and went back to writing. Later, when Ava slept, Mariah opened the blue folder again. This time she did not just look at the receipt. She took out every piece. The hospital bracelet. The first prescription label. The unsigned agreement. The notes from the gatehouse. The copied applications. The denials. The bus transfers from days she had crossed the city chasing answers. The back of the prenatal receipt with Caleb's words. She laid them across the table in a careful line, not as memories but as a map. Then she played Nate's voicemail one more time. "I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking for permission to keep looking." Mariah looked toward Ava's curtained corner, where her daughter's breathing rose and fell with the help of medicine bought by coins. Permission was a strange word from a man who had always had access, but maybe that was why it mattered. He had not demanded. He had asked. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She did not press it. Instead, she opened a message and typed slowly, because every word had to carry the weight of 7 years. "If you want to keep looking, start with March 14th. Ask who Caleb came to see before he died. Ask why your legal office knew about Ava before you did. And ask Vivian Shaw why she offered me $10,000 to make my daughter disappear." She read it 3 times. Then she sent it. Across the city, on the top floor of Whitmore Tower, Nate stood over the audit log with Caleb's notebook open beside it when his phone lit up. He read Mariah's message once and the room seemed to lose its air. $10,000. A confidentiality agreement. March 14th. Caleb at the tower. Nate turned to the window, where the city below looked orderly from a height, all lights and lines and movement contained. But from where Mariah stood, he was beginning to understand, the city was not orderly at all. It was a maze of counters, gates, forms, and locked offices, and somewhere in that maze, his son had tried to leave a door open for a child named Ava. Someone had closed it, and the receipt in Mariah's folder was no longer just a keepsake from a dead man. It was the first surviving piece of a truth powerful people had mistaken for something they could bury. The next morning began with a notice taped to Mariah's door. Not slipped under it. Not mailed. Taped at eye level in bright orange paper. The kind designed to make neighbors look twice. Ava saw it first because she was small enough to notice what adults tried to walk past. "Mama," she said, standing in the hallway with her backpack on and one braid ribbon hanging loose. "Why is our door wearing a sign?" Mariah stopped with the apartment key still in her hand. For 1 second, she hoped it was a building inspection notice, a water shutoff warning, anything ordinary enough to be survived before breakfast. Then she saw the words printed across the top. 5-day notice. Past due balance. Failure to pay may result in eviction proceedings. The hallway seemed to narrow around her. Mrs. Alvarez's television murmured behind the door downstairs. Someone's baby cried on the second floor. Pipes knocked in the wall. Normal sounds. Cruel sounds, because the world had not paused to watch a mother calculate how many days stood between her child and homelessness. Mariah stepped in front of the paper before Ava could read more. "It is grown-up mail," she said, peeling it off carefully so the tape would not tear the paint. Ava frowned. "Why is grown-up mail orange?" "Because grown-ups make bad design choices." Ava smiled a little but not enough. Children always knew when jokes were bandages. Mariah folded the notice and put it into her tote beside the blue folder. Her fingers did not shake until she turned away. The amount due was $1,186.50, including late fees, building fees, and something called administrative posting fee, which meant they had charged her $25 for the privilege of humiliating her on her own door. She had $212 in checking, $9 in cash, and one shift at the motel scheduled for Saturday if Ava's breathing stayed steady enough for Mrs. Alvarez to watch her. Rent was not the only deadline now. The inhaler from the pharmacy would last if used carefully, but the nebulizer solution had only 4 vials left. The specialist appointment required an updated referral. The school nurse wanted a new authorization form by Friday or Ava's medicine would have to stay locked in the office. And that morning, as Mariah helped Ava zip her coat, the child gave a small cough that started high in her throat and ended deeper in her chest. Mariah heard the change. She always heard the change. "How does your breathing feel?" Mariah asked. Ava shrugged too quickly. "Fine." Mariah knelt. "Fine like fine, or fine like you do not want me to worry?" Ava looked down at her shoes. The right lace had been tied in 2 knots because the plastic end had frayed. "Fine like school has art today." Mariah closed her eyes briefly. Art day. That was what Ava was protecting. Not a toy. Not a party. A 40-minute class with paper, glue sticks, and a teacher who let her draw houses with purple windows. Mariah fixed the loose ribbon and touched her daughter's cheek with the back of her hand. No fever. Thank God for one mercy that did not require a form. They left the apartment with the orange notice hidden but not gone, because paper had a way of growing heavier once folded. On the bus, Mariah stood over Ava's seat with one hand on the rail and the other on her tote, feeling the blue folder press against her hip like a second heartbeat. Her phone buzzed before they reached the school. Unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a text appeared from a number she did not recognize. "Ms. Brooks, this is Vivian Shaw. We need to resolve this matter before it causes unnecessary disruption for your daughter." Mariah read the sentence twice. Not before it hurts Ava. Before it causes disruption. Even in a threat, Vivian chose office language. Mariah locked the phone and slid it into her pocket. At the school entrance, Ava's teacher, Ms. Carter, stood near the doors greeting children by name. She was young, kind, and already tired in the way teachers became by February. "Good morning, Ava." "Good morning." Ava smiled and stepped inside, then turned back for her usual wave. Mariah waved. She waited until Ava disappeared down the hall before letting her face change. The school nurse caught her before she could leave. "Ms. Brooks, I am sorry to grab you, but we still need the updated medication authorization." Mariah nodded. "I called the clinic. They said the doctor has to sign it after the referral clears. Without the form, we cannot allow Ava to self-carry the inhaler. She does not self-carry. It stays with you." The policy changed. There it was. Policy. The word that made harm sound like weather. "When?" Mariah asked. "This semester." "Nobody told me." The nurse looked sympathetic, which Mariah appreciated and hated at the same time. "I sent a notice home. I work 2 jobs. Notices get buried. My daughter still needs to breathe whether I saw the paper or not." The nurse lowered her voice. "I understand, but if she has an episode and we do not have the correct paperwork, we have to call emergency services." Mariah pictured an ambulance bill. She pictured Ava scared under bright lights. She pictured another file, another note, another person writing non-compliant parent because a form lagged behind a child's lungs. "I will get it," Mariah said. She said it like a promise because mothers were required to make promises before knowing whether the world would allow them to keep them. By 8:45, Mariah was late to St. Agnes again. Mr. Harlan stood by the time clock with a clipboard and an expression that had already apologized before his mouth opened. "Brooks," he said quietly, "administration asked me to send you upstairs before you clock in." "For what?" They did not say. She thought of Vivian's text. "If this is about yesterday, I was on my break." "I know." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Just go up." The administrative office was too bright, with carpet so clean it made Mariah aware of the salt stains on her shoes. A human resources manager named Ms. Dempsey sat behind a desk with Mariah's employee file open. Beside her was a man from compliance who did not introduce himself until Mariah asked his name. "This should be brief," Ms. Dempsey said. "Brief never meant painless. There has been some concern about personal matters interfering with workplace operations." Mariah set her tote between her feet. "What personal matters?" A member of the executive board was approached in a restricted service area yesterday. Mariah stared at her. "He came downstairs to me." The compliance man folded his hands. "Regardless, it created a security concern. I was at my job. No one is disputing that." "Then what are you disputing?" Ms. Dempsey gave the practiced smile of someone who had delivered bad news enough times to remove herself from it. "We are not taking disciplinary action at this time. However, we are placing a note in your file documenting the incident and reminding you that employees may not use hospital premises to pursue personal claims against donors, executives, board members, or affiliated families." For a moment, Mariah heard nothing but the fluorescent hum overhead. Donors, executives, affiliated families. Ava had been reduced to a workplace boundary issue. Caleb had been reduced to an affiliated family. Mariah's throat tightened, but she did not let the tears rise. "Tears in rooms like this became evidence against you." "I did not pursue him," she said. "He followed a prescription bottle with his name on it." The compliance man looked at Ms. Dempsey. Ms. Dempsey looked at the file. Neither looked at Mariah. "We understand this is emotional," she said.
No Mariah replied.
"You understand this is dangerous for people above you. That is different." The room went still. Ms. Dempsey closed the folder. "You may return to work." Mariah walked out with her back straight, but by the time she reached the stairwell, she had to stop on the landing. She pressed one hand to the concrete wall and breathed through the heat behind her eyes. Not here. Not now. She had sheets to fold, a form to chase, rent to find, and a daughter who thought Art Day could survive anything. At 11:12, while Mariah was sorting pediatric gowns, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Mrs. Alvarez from the building. She would not have called during a shift unless it mattered. Mariah stepped behind a cart and answered. "The landlord came," Mrs. Alvarez whispered. "He was with a man in a coat. They were asking if you still live there, if Ava lives there, if anybody else stays overnight." Mariah's fingers tightened around the phone. "What did you say?" "I said you are a good mother, and they should fix the hallway light before asking questions." Even scared, Mariah almost smiled. "Thank you." "Mija, there was something else. The man took pictures of your door." Mariah looked across the laundry room at the spinning machines, the white sheets circling behind glass. "Pictures?" "Yes. And the orange paper. The notice. The humiliation had become documentation." "Did they say why?" "No. But I heard the landlord say legal exposure." "I do not like that." Mariah did not like it either. Legal exposure did not come from a landlord chasing rent. It came from someone making a file. It came from Vivian Shaw. By noon, the pressure of the day had changed shape. It was no longer just poverty pressing from all sides. It was coordination. The school form. The employment note. The landlord visit. Vivian's text. Different doors, same hand near the lock. Mariah sat alone on a bench outside the employee entrance and ate nothing because the sandwich she packed for herself had gone into Ava's lunch bag after Mariah saw there were only 4 crackers left. She opened her phone and finally answered Vivian's text. "Do not contact me unless it is through my attorney." She did not have an attorney. She sent it anyway. Vivian replied within 1 minute. "That is precisely what I am trying to help you avoid." Public disputes create instability. Courts ask difficult questions about housing, income, medical compliance, and capacity. Mariah read the words, and her body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with February. Capacity. Not paternity. Not truth. Capacity. Vivian was not just trying to keep Ava out of the Whitmore family. She was pointing at the one thing Mariah feared most, the world deciding that poverty meant unfitness. Another message followed. Mr. Whitmore is vulnerable right now. If you care about your daughter, you will not involve her in a fight you cannot win. Attached was a scanned image of a new document. Mariah opened it with a thumb that had gone numb. It was a proposed agreement. Financial support. Private medical coverage. Relocation assistance. Confidentiality. Name correction. No future claims. Ava Brooks. Not Ava Whitmore Brooks. Brooks only. Mariah stared at the corrected name until the letters blurred. This was the new price of silence. Not $10,000 this time. More. Enough to pay rent. Enough to cover medicine. Enough to move to a place without mice in the walls and heat that worked. Enough to make any outsider ask why a mother would refuse. That was the cruelty of it. Vivian had not offered nothing. She had offered exactly what Mariah needed, tied to the erasure of exactly what Ava deserved. At 2:30, Mariah clocked out early using unpaid personal time she could not afford. She took the train to the clinic to chase the doctor's signature. The waiting room was full. A toddler cried near the fish tank. An old man slept with his chin against his chest. Mariah stood at the reception window while the clerk searched for Ava's paperwork. It is pending specialist review, the clerk said. The school needs it by Friday. I understand. Today is Wednesday. I understand. Her medication access depends on it. The clerk looked at her with a tired patience that was not unkind but had no power. The doctor is backed up. Mariah placed both palms on the counter. My daughter is 6. When her chest gets tight, she does not have a pending specialist review. She has minutes. The clerk lowered her voice. I can mark it urgent.
Urgent.
Another word that sounded strong until you learned how many urgent things sat in front of yours. Mariah left with no signature. Outside the clinic, her phone rang from the school. This time not a text. A call. She answered before the first ring finished. Miss Brooks. It was Miss Carter, the teacher. Ava is okay, but she had some trouble during art. The nurse used the inhaler because the old form is still valid through the end of the day, but she says we need the new one before Friday morning. Mariah closed her eyes on the sidewalk as people moved around her. Can I speak to Ava? There was rustling, then Ava's small voice. Mama. Mariah softened instantly. Hey baby. How are you breathing? Better. Did you finish your art? A pause. No. My house got glue on it. Mariah swallowed. That is okay. Houses can be messy and still be good houses. Ava was quiet. Mama, am I going to the hospital? Not today. Mariah said it firmly. Enough for Ava to believe, and desperately enough for God to hear. When the call ended, Mariah stood under the gray afternoon sky with the clinic's automatic doors opening and closing behind her. She had 48 hours to get a form, 5 days to stop an eviction, 4 vials of nebulizer solution, 1 employer note in her file, and a legal officer trying to buy her daughter's name before Nathaniel Whitmore found whatever had been hidden. She wanted to call him. She wanted to send every document, every threat, every notice. But Vivian's warning sat in her phone like a trap. Courts ask difficult questions. Housing, income, medical compliance, capacity. That evening, Mariah picked up Ava and took her home by bus. Ava was quiet, worn out by the episode at school, her head resting against the window while city lights smeared across the glass. At their building, the hallway bulb flickered above the stairs. The orange notice was gone from the door because Mariah had removed it, but a square of tape remained, for pale marks where shame had been attached. Ava touched one sticky corner with her finger. Can we still live here? Mariah's chest tightened. She had protected Ava from bills, phone calls, legal words, and adult fear. But she could not protect her from tape marks on a door. Yes, she said. We still live here. For how long? Mariah unlocked the door. That question had no safe answer. Inside, she made oatmeal for dinner because oatmeal could be called warm and warm could be called enough. Ava ate slowly, then climbed into bed early with her sketch from art class. The paper was wrinkled. A purple house leaned to one side. Glue dried across the roof in cloudy streaks. In the window, Ava had drawn 2 stick figures. One tall, one small. Above them, in careful letters, she had written "Our House." Mariah sat beside her and brushed a curl away from her forehead. Ava's breathing was softer now, but not right. Not wrong enough for panic. Not right enough for rest. After Ava fell asleep, Mariah spread the day's papers across the kitchen table. The eviction notice, the school form, the clinic reminder, the hospital employment memo, Vivian's proposed agreement printed. At the library for 20 cents a page because proof mattered even when it hurt. Then she placed Caleb's note in the center. If anything happens, tell my father she is ours. For 7 years, Mariah had thought the hardest part was making someone believe the truth. Now she understood the harder part. Surviving long enough for the truth to matter. Her phone buzzed. Nathaniel Whitmore. This time a text. Ms. Brooks, I found evidence of a legal hold placed after you came to the gate. I need to meet with you tomorrow. I think there is more, but Vivian is blocking access. Please tell me if she contacts you. Mariah looked at Vivian's agreement on the table. She looked at Ava's purple house. Then she looked at the medicine schedule taped to the refrigerator, where Friday morning was circled in red because that was when the school would lock away the inhaler without the form. The thing Mariah stood to lose was not just a name, not just an apartment, not just a claim to a family that had rejected her. It was the fragile structure she had built around Ava one exhausting day at a time. Medicine within reach, a bed in the corner, a school that knew her, a mother still considered capable. Vivian had found every weak beam and started pressing. Mariah picked up the phone and typed back to Nate. She has contacted me. She is trying to make me choose between help and the truth. Then she attached the agreement. Her thumb hovered over send. Across the room, Ava coughed once in her sleep, a small sound that cut through every fear and simplified the world into one fact. Mariah did not need to win against rich people. She needed her daughter to wake up safe. She pressed send. At Whitmore Tower, Nate opened the attachment 3 minutes later, standing in the dark conference room with the city behind him and the audit log on the table. He read the agreement once. Then again. Name correction. Confidentiality. No future claims. Ava Brooks. His hand tightened around the phone. Vivian had not waited for the truth. She had tried to purchase the space where the truth would have stood. Nate turned toward the locked archive room at the end of the hall, where boxes of old Foundation records sat. Under coded access. For the first time in years, he did not think like a chairman. He thought like a father whose son had tried to tell him something, and like a grandfather who might already be too late. The deadline was no longer hidden in a legal file. It was breathing in a little girl's chest, taped to a school form, printed on an eviction notice, and written in a mother's exhausted message. By Friday morning, if nothing changed, the system would do what it had been built to do. It would not announce cruelty. It would simply follow procedure, close the window, lock the medicine away, and call the damage nobody's fault. By midnight, Nathaniel Whitmore had stopped asking the archive system for permission. The locked records room at the end of the executive floor had always felt ceremonial to him. A place where old board minutes, donor agreements, estate documents, and legacy foundation files went after their usefulness expired. He had walked past that door hundreds of times without touching the keypad. Now he stood in front of it with Billionaire from Information Systems on one side, Malcolm on the other, and a printed copy of Vivian Shaw's agreement in his hand. Ava Brooks. Not Ava Whitmore Brooks. The corrected name sat on the page like a theft disguised as a typo. Sir, Priya said softly, I can access the digital logs, but physical archive entry after hours requires legal approval or chairman override. Nate looked at the keypad. I am the chairman. Yes, sir. That is why I am still standing here. He entered his code. The light turned green. The lock opened with a small mechanical click that sounded far too ordinary for the kind of door it had become. Inside, the archive room smelled of cardboard, dust, and cold air. Rows of gray shelves held labeled boxes in perfect order. Grant cycles, estate governance, pediatric access policy, donor disputes, legal holds, family matters. Family matters. Nate stared at that section longer than he wanted to. Vivian had always been organized. That was what made her dangerous. Disorganization lost documents by accident. Vivian made sure they disappeared to the correct place. Priya opened a laptop on a rolling cart and began comparing box labels to the audit trail. Nate pulled the first legal hold box himself. His hands were steady until he saw Caleb's initials on a file tab.
CV. Pending intake.
He stood there for a moment, one hand on the folder, afraid of what he wanted most. Malcolm, who had driven him for 12 years and spoken only when words were useful, said, "You do not have to open it alone." Nate nodded once, but he opened it himself. The first pages were not the answer. Intake notes. Laboratory vendor forms. A billing request marked incomplete. A printed email from Caleb to Dr. Ellison asking whether testing could be expedited after birth. Caleb's words were practical, almost impatient. "Need documentation my father will accept. Mother is Mariah Brooks. Baby due mid-March. I will take responsibility." Nate read the sentence twice. "I will take responsibility." It was a simple sentence, but it cut deeper than accusation. Caleb had been trying to become the man Nate had claimed to raise, and Nate had mistaken him for a problem to manage. Priya leaned closer to the file. There should be a results reference number if the lab processed anything. She turned another page. Then another. Nothing. The folder contained evidence of intent, but not proof of completion. Enough to change the shape of the story. Not enough to end it. Nate felt the familiar frustration of almost knowing. Almost hearing Caleb. Almost reaching Ava before the system took another bite out of her life. Then a small yellow sticky note fell from the back of the folder and landed at his feet. Malcolm picked it up and handed it to him. It was written in Vivian's handwriting, neat and narrow. Gate contact completed. Mother refused support. Maintain non-escalation. Remove paternal language from assistance review. Nate stared at the last sentence. Remove paternal language. Not review paternal language. Not verify it. Remove it. "Priya," he said, and his voice sounded strange even to him. "What does non-escalation mean in foundation processing?" Priya's face changed. "It means the case cannot be moved to executive review. It stays contained within the department assigned. Legal. In this case, yes." So if Mariah applied for medication assistance under Ava's full name, it would route to legal. And legal could prevent it from reaching anyone else. Priya did not answer immediately. Yes. Nate looked back at the folder. The truth had not been disproven. It had been contained. That was the first half of it. Not a family scandal. A system design. A gate built so carefully that even desperation could not climb over it. At 6:12 the next morning, Mariah woke to Ava sitting upright on the edge of her bed, trying to be quiet while struggling for a full breath. The apartment was still dark. The radiator clicked uselessly. A thin blue line of dawn pressed against the curtain. Mariah was out of bed before fear had time to become thought. "Baby, look at me." Ava's eyes were too wide. One hand gripped the blanket, the other pressed against her chest. Mariah reached for the nebulizer, counted the vials and found 3 left. 3. She set up the machine with fingers that moved from memory. Tube, cup, solution, mask, switch. The machine rattled to life, old and uneven, louder than it should have been. Ava breathed through the mask while Mariah sat beside her and counted. In, out, in, out. Color returned slowly, but the episode left Ava drained. Her small body curled against Mariah's side as if breathing had used up the morning before it began. Friday was 1 day away. 1 day before the school form deadline. 1 day before the nurse could lock away the inhaler. 1 day before the system's next polite refusal. Mariah looked at the eviction notice on the table, Vivian's agreement beside it, and Nate's unanswered text glowing on her phone. She had no clean way out. That was how traps worked. They did not block every door. They left one door open and made sure it led to surrender. At 8:30, instead of going straight to St. Agnes, Mariah took Ava to school and asked for 10 minutes with the principal, the nurse, and Ms. Carter. She brought the blue folder. Not everything. Just enough. Prescription history. Doctor notes. The pending referral. The current inhaler. Ava sat beside her in the office holding a library book about planets, her legs swinging, pretending not to listen. I am asking you not to punish my daughter for paperwork caught between a clinic and an insurance system, Mariah said. The principal, Dr. Jennings, folded her hands. Ms. Brooks, no one wants to punish Ava. Mariah looked at the locked medicine cabinet behind the nurse's desk. Intentions do not help if the inhaler is on the wrong side of that door. Miss Carter looked down. The nurse looked pained. Dr. Jennings looked tired. They were not villains. That was what made it harder. Most harm did not arrive with a cruel face. It arrived with people who felt bad while enforcing rules they did not write. I can give you until Monday, Dr. Jennings said finally. But only if the clinic confirms the form is in process today. Mariah exhaled carefully. It was not victory. It was a borrowed weekend. Sometimes mothers survived on borrowed weekends. By the time she reached St. Agnes, she had 3 missed calls from Vivian and 1 from an unknown legal number. Mr. Harlan met her near the laundry entrance. Brooks, before you clock in. There is someone waiting outside. Mariah's stomach tightened. Vivian. No. Mr. Whitmore. Nate stood near the loading bay this time, not in the service corridor, not forcing her into another public scene. He held a file folder, thinner than hers, but heavy in the way certain papers are heavy. He looked as if he had not slept. I found something, he said. Mariah did not move closer. So did I. An orange notice on my door. A school medication deadline. A warning in my employee file. Vivian offering me more money to erase my daughter's name. Which something are we talking about? He took the hit because it was deserved. A legal hold. Caleb's intake request. And a note instructing the foundation to remove paternal language from Ava's assistance reviews. Mariah's face did not change at first. Then something behind her eyes shifted. Not relief, not surprise, but confirmation so painful it almost looked like grief. I told them, she whispered. I know. No, her voice sharpened. You know now. I knew then. Nate looked down. You are right. For a moment, only the sounds of the loading bay filled the space between them. A truck backing up, metal doors clanging, wheels rolling over concrete. Mariah reached for the folder. Nate handed it to her without making her ask twice. She read the copy of Vivian's note under the gray morning light. Maintain non-escalation. Remove paternal language from assistance review. Her thumb stopped on the words. She had imagined many explanations over the years. Miscommunication. Snobbery. Denial. Grief. Racism dressed as caution. Class protection dressed as concern. She had not imagined a note so cleanly proving what the denials had always felt like. Not that they could not find the truth. That they had chosen not to let it rise. This does not prove DNA, Nate said carefully. I know. But it proves Caleb took steps. I know. And it proves Vivian interfered. Mariah folded the page along the edge and handed it back. It proves your system believed my daughter was close enough to be dangerous, but not close enough to deserve help. Nate had no defense for that. The sentence was too exact. Mariah turned as if to leave, then stopped. There is something else you need to understand, she said. When the foundation denied Ava, it did not just deny money. It denied the referral that would have moved her into the pediatric pulmonary program. Without that referral, every refill became harder. Every form became late. Every late form became another reason to question me. That is how it works. One locked door becomes 5. Nate listened, and for the first time, he understood that Mariah was not telling him a sad story. She was explaining an architecture. I signed the fraud prevention policy, he said. Mariah looked at him. What? After Caleb died, there were claims. Some false, some impossible to verify. Vivian recommended a policy requiring additional review for anyone using the Whitmore name in foundation assistance applications. I signed it. The air changed again. Mariah stepped back as if he had reached for her without moving. So it was you. I did not know it would be used this way. That keeps being the chorus. I am not saying it as an excuse. Then what are you saying it as? Nate looked toward the hospital building at the name. Above the entrance, his name, Caleb's name, Ava's name if the truth meant what both of them feared and hoped it meant. A confession. Mariah studied him. The word confession did not undo anything, but it stood differently than denial. She wanted to hate him cleanly. Vivian was easy to hate. Systems were easy to rage against until you had to speak to a person who had signed the paper without reading the shadow it would cast. Nate was not innocent. He was not the whole monster either. That complicated everything, and Mariah did not have time for complicated. Her daughter had 3 vials left. "Can you get Ava into the pulmonary program today?" she asked. Nate's head lifted. "Yes. Not as a Whitmore." "What do you mean?" "I mean not special because you think she might be yours. Not a secret hallway. Not a rich man making one call for one child while every other mother sits on hold. Can you get her in because the denial was wrong?" Nate paused. That pause told her the difference. He could move mountains for family. Could he move policy for justice? "I can reopen the denied application under emergency review," he said. "For Ava. For Ava immediately. And then I can order an audit of every application flagged under the same policy." Mariah did not thank him. The absence of gratitude was not rudeness. It was clarity. "Do that first," she said. "Then we can talk about Caleb." Nate almost smiled, not from happiness, but from the strange recognition of Caleb in her answer. Do the right thing before asking to be forgiven. He took out his phone and called Priya first, then the interim medical director, then the head of pediatric access. Mariah stood there through every call, listening for vague promises and correcting them when they appeared. "No," she said when one administrator suggested a courtesy placement. "Say corrected denial." Nate repeated it. "Corrected denial." "No," she said when another asked whether the patient was connected to the Whitmore family. "Say applicant was improperly routed." Nate repeated that too. Improperly routed. By noon, Ava had an appointment for Friday afternoon. The school had received confirmation that the medical authorization was in process and the pharmacy had approved emergency nebulizer solution without waiting for the old prior authorization loop. It was the first time in 6 years that the system moved before Mariah begged it to. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt exhausted by how easy it became once the right person cared. That was the ugliest discovery of the day. Not that the door was locked. That someone had always had the key. At 1:15, Vivian Shaw arrived at St. Agnes with 2 board members and a face arranged into concern. She found Nate outside the administrative conference room with Mariah beside him, and stopped just short of showing irritation. "Nathaniel," she said, "I wish you had waited. These matters require coordination." Mariah looked at her. "You mean containment?" Vivian ignored her. Opening emergency access based on disputed personal claims creates precedent. Nate held up the copied note. So does removing paternal language from a child's application. Vivian's expression remained steady, but the silence around her tightened. "That document lacks context." Mariah gave a short laugh. "That is amazing. Every time paper helps you, it is policy. Every time paper helps me, it lacks context." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Vivian looked at Nate. "You are putting the foundation at risk." Nate looked past her through the glass wall, toward the pediatric wing where parents sat with clipboards, bags, strollers, and tired eyes, each waiting for someone to decide whether their emergency fit a category. "No," he said. "I think I finally found the risk." Vivian's face cooled. "And what is that?" Nate looked down at the folder in his hand, at Caleb's intake request, at the note, at the old policy carrying his signature like a stain. A system that protects itself from the people it was built to serve. Mariah did not look at him, but she heard it. Not an apology. Not enough. But a turn. The story had changed direction. Until that morning, she had been a mother trying to prove her daughter belonged to the truth. Now the question was larger and more dangerous. Who had designed the machinery that kept the truth from rising? And why had Vivian Shaw worked so hard to make sure Ava Whitmore Brooks remained only a restricted file, a denied application, a name corrected into silence? By the time Mariah reached the glass doors of the apartment office, the sky over East Cleveland had turned the color of old steel. Rain tapped against the sidewalk in thin, nervous lines, and her daughter's yellow backpack bumped against her hip with every step. Inside the front pocket was the thing that had changed everything in Part 8, The folded maintenance invoice with the same signature that appeared on 3 eviction notices, 2 inspection reports, and the emergency repair order that nobody was supposed to find. It was not enough to prove the whole truth. Not yet. But it was enough to make someone afraid. The lobby smelled like floor wax and wet coats. A television mounted above the mailboxes played a local weather report with the sound turned low. Behind the leasing desk, Denise Palmer looked up from her computer and smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Mariah," she said slowly, like the name itself was an inconvenience. "You are late on rent again." Mariah kept one hand on the backpack strap and the other around the small fingers of 8-year-old Nia. "I am here because my lock code stopped working," she said. "My daughter needs her asthma pump. It is inside our apartment." Denise leaned back in her chair. Her nails clicked once against the desk. "Your access was suspended because your file is under review." "Under review by who?" Mariah asked. Her voice did not rise. That was what made Denise look at her more carefully. Mariah was tired. Her shoes were still damp from walking 6 blocks after the bus broke down. Her uniform shirt from the diner had a grease stain near the pocket. But she was not begging. She was standing there with a document in her daughter's backpack, and the quiet steadiness of a woman who had already been humiliated too many times to be easily moved by another attempt. Denise's smile disappeared. "You need to lower your tone." "My tone is already low," Mariah said. "My child's medicine is in that apartment." Behind them the elevator opened. 2 tenants stepped out, saw the scene, and slowed. One was Mrs. Alvarez from the 2nd floor, carrying a laundry basket. The other was Mr. Reed, who had been asking for heat repairs since November. Denise noticed them too. That was when she stood. "This is a private matter." "No," Mariah said. "This became everybody's matter when you started locking people out before court dates." The words landed harder than she expected. Mrs. Alvarez stopped walking. Mr. Reed shifted the grocery bag in his arms and stared at Denise. For half a second nobody spoke. Then the office door behind Denise opened, and Calvin Broom stepped out. He was the regional property manager, the kind of man who wore expensive shoes into buildings where the stairwell smelled like mildew. He had a folder under one arm and a Bluetooth earpiece glowing blue against his face. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Denise answered before Mariah could. "Ms. Walker is causing a disturbance." Calvin's eyes went from Mariah to Nia, then to the backpack. He did not ask if the child was all right. He did not ask why a tenant was locked out in the rain. He only said, "You received notice." "I received a paper taped to my door at 6 in the morning, Mariah said. "It said I had 3 days to pay fees that were not on my lease." Calvin gave a small sigh, as though she had disappointed him by knowing too much. "Administrative charges are clearly explained in your resident portal." "Then explain this." Mariah unzipped the backpack and pulled out the folded invoice. The paper had softened at the creases from being opened and closed too many times. She placed it on the desk, smoothing it with 2 fingers. "Why does a repair company that says it fixed my ceiling in January have the same mailing address as your cousin's company?" The room changed. Not loudly, not with a gasp. It changed the way air changes before a storm, when even the walls seemed to be listening. Calvin looked at the invoice. His face did not move, but something behind his eyes tightened. Denise reached for the paper. Mariah placed her palm over it. "Do not touch it." Calvin smiled then. A clean practice smile. "Ms. Walker, I understand you are under stress. Single parents carry a lot. Sometimes paperwork can be confusing. Not this paperwork. You are making accusations you do not understand." "I understand enough." Nia coughed once, small and dry, and Mariah felt the sound in her ribs. She turned slightly toward her daughter. "Baby, breathe slow." Nia nodded, trying to be brave in the way children learn when adults keep making them practice courage too early. Calvin's gaze flicked toward the child, then back to Mariah. "This is exactly why the unit is no longer appropriate for occupancy," he said. "Health concerns. Safety concerns. We documented everything." Mariah froze. "You documented mold I reported 6 months ago. We documented unsanitary conditions." Mrs. Alvarez made a sound behind her. "That is not true." Calvin ignored her. He opened the folder under his arm and slid out photographs. Close-ups of the bathroom ceiling. A trash bag near the kitchen door. A pile of folded laundry on a chair. Cropped pictures. Pictures taken from angles meant to turn poverty into evidence. Mariah stared at them, and for 1 second the room tilted. Not because the pictures were ugly. Because she recognized the date stamp. The inspection had happened the morning after she worked a double shift, when Nia was sick and the ceiling leaked brown water into a mixing bowl. She had begged for help. They had taken pictures instead. "You came in to inspect the leak," she said. "You used my emergency repair request to build a case against me." Calvin's voice softened, which somehow made it colder. "The city takes child welfare seriously." Mariah's fingers tightened around Nia's hand. "What did you do?" Denise would not look at her. That was answer enough. Outside, a car pulled up to the curb. Mariah saw the reflection in the lobby glass. A dark sedan, headlights cutting through rain. The driver's door opened, but she did not turn. Her whole world had narrowed to Calvin, the folder, and the sudden knowledge that the fight was no longer just about rent. It was about custody. It was about dignity. It was about a system that knew exactly where to press until a poor mother looked unstable for refusing to break quietly. "You called them," Mariah whispered. Calvin closed the folder. A mandated report was filed after concerns were observed. Concerns you created. Concerns we documented. The elevator opened again. This time a young woman in a navy coat stepped out carrying a tablet and a plastic folder. Beside her was a uniformed building security guard, who looked uncomfortable enough to stare at the floor. The woman approached the desk. "Mariah Walker?" Nia moved closer to her mother. Mariah put her body slightly in front of her child. "I am Mariah. I am Angela Morris with County Family Services. We received a report regarding housing instability and environmental concerns." She spoke gently, but the words were still a blade wrapped in cotton. Mariah swallowed. "My daughter has a home. They locked us out of it." Angela looked toward Calvin. Calvin spread his hands. "Access was suspended due to non-payment and safety issues." "That is illegal before a court order," Mr. Reed said from behind them. Everyone turned. He stood near the mailboxes, grocery bags sagging in one hand, jaw tight. "My nephew went through that last year. You cannot lock her out like that." Calvin's eyes hardened. "Sir, this does not concern you. It concerns every tenant in this building," Mrs. Alvarez said. She set her laundry basket down. "They did it to Mr. Jackson in 4B. They changed his code when his disability check was 2 days late." Denise snapped. "That is enough." But it was not enough. Something had opened. A door maybe. Or a wound. From the hallway, another tenant appeared. Then another, drawn by the voices, drawn by the sight of Mariah standing at the desk with a child pressed against her side and a property manager trying to make the truth look like disorder. Angela looked from one face to another. Her expression shifted from procedure to uncertainty. "I need to understand what is happening here." Calvin stepped forward. "What is happening is that Ms. Walker is attempting to avoid lawful consequences by making defamatory claims." "Then let us call the owner," Mariah said. Calvin went still again. "The owner is not involved in tenant disputes." "He is involved now." Mariah reached into the backpack again, past Nia's lunch folder, past the small purple inhaler spacer, past the crumpled spelling test with a gold star at the top. She pulled out the business card Darius Kincaid had given her after Part 8, when he saw the invoice and realized the building his investment group had quietly acquired was not just poorly managed. It was being used. Fees inflated. Repairs faked. Tenants pressured out. Families made to look irresponsible so units could be cleared for renovation. He had written a number on the back of the card in black ink and said, "Only use this if they push back before I get there." Mariah had not wanted to use it. Pride had made her wait. Fear had made her walk to the office first. But now Nia coughed again, and pride became smaller than breath. She dialed. Calvin watched her thumb move and said, "I would be very careful who you involve." Mariah held the phone to her ear. "I was careful when I paid rent before buying groceries. I was careful when I put towels under a leaking ceiling so my child would not slip. I was careful when I saved every receipt you hoped I would throw away. I am done being careful for people who were never careful with us." The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Mariah. It was Darius. Calm but not distant. They locked us out, she said. They called family services. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for the words to become real. Put me on speaker. Mariah tapped the screen. Darius's voice filled the lobby. Mr. Broom, this is Darius Kincaid. Calvin's face lost color in small degrees, as if someone were dimming him from the inside. Mr. Kincaid, he said. There seems to be some confusion. There is no confusion, Darius said. I am looking at the building access logs from my office. Ms. Walker's code was disabled at 5:18 this evening. No court order is attached to the file. No emergency condemnation notice exists. Explain that. Denise sat down slowly. Calvin opened his mouth, but Darius continued. I am also looking at payments made to Northline Maintenance over the past 18 months. Same vendor. Same inflated repair codes. Same approval initials. Yours. The tenants were silent now. Even the television seemed quieter. Angela lowered her tablet. Mariah could hear rain against the windows and Nia breathing beside her. Shallow but steady. Calvin tried one last time. Sir, with respect, you are seeing incomplete information. Ms. Walker has been difficult. She has made repeated complaints, refused reasonable payment plans, and created a hostile environment for staff. Mariah almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the lie was so polished it must have been used before. Darius's voice did not rise. I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing those complaints. Every one of them was about water intrusion, electrical issues, heat loss, or unexplained fees. That is not hostility. That is a tenant asking for the service she already paid for. Calvin looked toward the security guard, as if searching for authority he no longer had. Darius said, Angela, are you still there? The family services worker blinked. Yes, sir. Please note that the child was denied access to prescribed medication due to an unauthorized lockout initiated by property management. Also note that the parent attempted to regain access peacefully and presented documentation. Angela looked at Mariah, and for the first time, Mariah saw something like apology in her eyes. I am noting that. Calvin's jaw flexed. This is being mishandled. No, Darius said. This is being witnessed. That word moved through the lobby like a match struck in the dark. Witnessed. Not saved. Not pitted. Witnessed. Mariah felt it settle somewhere deep, somewhere bruised. Then Darius said the sentence that turned the crisis into a cliff edge. Mr. Broom, you are suspended effective immediately pending a forensic audit. Denise Palmer, you are to reactivate Ms. Walker's access code now. If that code is not active in 60 seconds, the next call goes to the city housing inspector and my attorney, both of whom are already on standby. Denise's hand shook as she reached for the keyboard. Calvin stepped toward her. Do not touch that system. The security guard finally lifted his head. Sir, maybe you should step back. No one moved for a breath. Then Denise typed. 3 keys. A pause. 2 more keys. The printer behind her clicked and pushed out a receipt-sized slip. She handed it to Mariah without looking up. Your code is active. Mariah took the paper. Her hand did not shake until it was already in her palm. By morning the rain had stopped, but the building still smelled wet. It came through the walls, through the carpet in the hallway, through the brown stain above Mariah's kitchen window where the ceiling had been patched so many times the paint looked like a bandage over a wound that never closed. Nia sat at the kitchen table with her inhaler beside her cereal bowl, tracing the gold star on her spelling test with one finger while Mariah stood near the stove with her phone in her hand. She had slept for 1 hour. Maybe less. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Calvin Broom in the lobby, smiling like a man who still had one more door to lock. At 8:12 in the morning that door opened. Not physically. Digitally. Darius Kincaid called her from a conference room downtown with 3 people on the line, his attorney, a forensic accountant, and a housing compliance investigator named Ms. Bell, whose voice had the careful patience of someone who had heard 1,000 lies and learned to wait for the paper to contradict them. Mariah, Darius said, I need you to look at the invoice again. Mariah pulled the folded paper from Nia's backpack. The invoice was creased at the corners, soft from being carried like something too important to leave behind. Northline Maintenance. Emergency ceiling repair. Unit 7C. Approved by C. Broom. Paid in full. The amount was $4,875 for work that had never happened. I am looking at it, she said. There is a line near the bottom, Darius said. A work order number. Mariah read it aloud.
Wo 7194.
The accountant on the call went quiet. Then papers moved. Keys clicked. Ms. Bell asked, "Are you sure it says 7194? Not 7149? 7194, Mariah said. Nia looked up from the table. Children always know when adults are trying not to sound afraid. Darius exhaled once. Not relief. Recognition. That is the same work order number on the fire system inspection for the south stairwell. Mariah looked toward her apartment door, as if the hallway could hear. What does that mean? It means they used one legitimate work order as a cover for several fake repairs, the accountant said. Same number, different vendors, different units, different dates. That is why it did not show up at first. The system treated them like linked expenses. Mariah stared at the invoice. A small number at the bottom of a page. A number Denise had almost taken from her. A number Calvin had tried to bury under shame, rent fees, family services, and photographs of laundry. But why my apartment? She asked. The answer came from Ms. Bell. Because your unit was the key. At 9:03, Darius arrived at the building in the same dark sedan Mariah had seen reflected in the lobby glass the night before. He did not come alone. 2 city inspectors came with him. So did Ms. Bell, wearing a gray coat and carrying a leather folder thick enough to make Denise stop typing when she walked through the door. Calvin was not there. That was what Denise said first. Mr. Broom is not in today. Darius did not look surprised. He will be. They went upstairs to 7C. Mariah unlocked the door herself. She wanted that moment. She wanted to enter her own home without anyone granting permission. The apartment looked smaller with all of them inside. The inspectors checked the ceiling, the window frame, the outlet near Nia's bed, the closet wall where Mariah had taped plastic over the damp spot, so her daughter's school clothes would not smell like mildew. One inspector photographed the brown ring above the kitchen window. The other tapped the drywall gently and frowned when the sound came back hollow. This was never repaired, he said. It was painted. Mariah closed her eyes. She had known it. Still, hearing it from someone with a badge on his jacket did something to her knees. Darius stood in the living room silent, taking in the apartment not as an investor, not as a billionaire, but as a man finally seeing the distance between a spreadsheet and a child's breathing. Then Ms. Bell opened her folder. Ms. Walker, do you remember when you first reported the leak? Mariah nodded. January 12th. It was Nia's birthday week. I remember because I had hidden her. Cupcakes in the cabinet and water dripped through the box. She pointed to the upper shelf. I cried over 12 vanilla cupcakes like that was the worst thing that could happen. Nobody interrupted. I filed the request that night. The next morning, a maintenance man came and took pictures. He said he needed approval before opening the wall. Nobody came back. Ms. Bell removed a paper from the folder. The system says the repair was completed January 14th. It was not. The system also says you refused entry on January 15th. Mariah's face changed. I was at work. Nia was at school. We know, Ms. Bell said. She placed another document on the kitchen table. A scanned visitor log from the building entrance. Because the entry record shows a master access code used at 10:42 that morning. Not yours. Management's. Darius looked at Denise, who had come upstairs with them and now stood near the door with her arms folded too tightly. Who used that code? He asked. Denise swallowed. Managers share access for emergency purposes. Ms. Bell turned one page. The login was tied to your staff identification. Denise's mouth opened, then closed. Mariah looked from Denise to the paper. The twist did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a lock clicking open. Denise had not just watched it happen. She had been inside the apartment. Ms. Bell continued. That same morning, photographs were uploaded to Ms. Walker's resident file. The photographs later became the basis for the report to Family Services. Mariah felt heat crawl up her neck. You came into my home while I was not here. Denise's eyes filled, but not with remorse yet. With panic. Calvin told me it was a compliance visit. You photographed my child's bedroom. Denise looked down. The room became very still. Nia was not in the apartment. Mariah had left her with Mrs. Alvarez before the inspection, and thank God for that, because there are some truths a child should not have to hear before breakfast. Darius's voice was low. Why? Denise pressed her lips together. For a moment Mariah thought she would lie again. Then the building made a sound around them, pipes knocking in the wall, an old tired building. Telling on itself. Denise sat down at the edge of the kitchen chair like her legs had stopped holding the rest of her story. Because 7C was the last occupied unit in the stack. The inspector looked up from his moisture meter. What stack? Denise wiped under one eye with the back of her hand. Units 1C through 8C. Same plumbing line. Same exterior wall. The renovation plans could not be approved, while one unit was still officially habitable with an unresolved water complaint. Calvin said if Mariah left voluntarily, they could mark the line vacant, close out the repair backlog, and start the luxury conversion. Mariah did not move. The old stain above the window, the lockout, the fake fees, the report, the photographs, the invoice. All of it pulled into one line so clean it almost looked designed by a machine. So you were not trying to collect rent, she said. You were trying to erase the complaint. Denise looked at her then, and whatever defense she had left broke. Yes. Darius turned away for 1 second, his hand at his mouth. Not because he did not know corruption existed. He did. But corruption looks different when it has a child's inhaler on the kitchen table, and birthday cupcakes ruined in a cabinet. Ms. Bell placed the last document down. There is more. Mariah almost said she did not want more. But she had come too far to stop at the edge of the truth. Ms. Bell pointed to a name on the renovation proposal. The contractor scheduled to receive the conversion contract is Broom Urban Renewal. The attorney on Darius's phone, still connected through speaker, said, owned by Calvin Broom's brother. Darius's eyes hardened. And Northline Maintenance? Ms. Bell answered. Registered to a holding company connected to the same family. There it was. The final shape. The leak had not been ignored because Mariah was poor. It had been ignored because her suffering was profitable. Every month she stayed, the complaint blocked the conversion. Every time she demanded repair, she created a record. So they turned the record against her. They made her look negligent. They made her look unstable. They made her child's asthma into evidence against the mother who was trying to protect her. And the tiny number at the bottom of an invoice, the number Calvin thought no one like Mariah would ever understand, had tied the fake repair to the fake inspection, the fake fees, the family services report, and the contract waiting behind it all. Darius looked at Mariah. I am sorry, he said. She shook her head once. Do not be sorry yet. He understood. Sorry was not justice. Sorry did not clean mold out of walls. Sorry did not remove a false report from a mother's record. Sorry did not teach a system to fear the people it had learned to dismiss. Downstairs, the lobby doors opened again. Through the window, Mariah saw Calvin Broom step inside with a phone pressed to his ear, moving fast, his coat unbuttoned, his face tight with the confidence of a man coming to fix a problem before it became evidence. But he was too late. By the time he reached the office, Darius, Ms. Bell, the inspectors, Denise, and Mariah were already standing there. The folder was open on the desk. The invoice lay on top. Calvin stopped when he saw it, not because it was dramatic, not because he did not recognize the paper, but because he did. That was the first honest thing his face had shown since Mariah met him. Darius picked up the invoice and held it between 2 fingers. You missed one number, he said. Calvin said nothing. Darius stepped closer. That is the thing about people you overlook. You assume they do not keep records. You assume they lose receipts, forget dates, misplace papers, get tired, get scared, get quiet. He glanced toward Mariah. She did not. Calvin's eyes moved to Denise. Denise looked away. And in that silence, Mariah understood the whole story had finally turned. Not because a powerful man had spoken, but because the evidence had. The stain on the ceiling. The birthday cupcakes. The disabled lock code. The false photographs. The work order number. The same small details everyone had treated as nothing had become the map back to the truth. Mariah folded her arms, standing in the same lobby where she had nearly lost everything the night before. "I want the report withdrawn," she said. "I want every tenant file reviewed. I want every fee returned. And I want my daughter to know that when people lied about her mother, the truth did not whisper." She looked at Calvin. It answered out loud. Calvin Broom did not leave the building in handcuffs. That would have been too simple, too clean, too easy for a story that had done its damage through paperwork, access codes, and quiet signatures at the bottom of pages nobody was supposed to read. He left through the front doors at 11:36 in the morning with his company phone disabled, his building credentials revoked, and 2 city investigators walking beside him with a sealed copy of the audit order in a blue folder. He tried to keep his shoulders straight. He tried to look annoyed instead of exposed. But everyone in the lobby saw the truth in the way he did not meet Mariah's eyes. The man who had spoken to her like she was a problem to remove now had to walk past the tenants he had tried to frighten into silence. Mrs. Alvarez stood by the mailboxes with her laundry basket at her feet. Mr. Reed leaned on his cane near the elevator. 3 mothers from the 4th floor stood together, arms folded, their children quiet beside them. Nobody shouted. Nobody clapped. They simply watched him go. Sometimes justice does not need noise. Sometimes it only needs witnesses. Denise Palmer sat at the leasing desk with both hands folded in her lap, no longer protected by the glass partition, no longer hidden behind policy language and resident portal notices. Ms. Bell explained the next steps in a calm voice that made every sentence feel permanent. The illegal lockouts would be reported. The false family services claim would be formally withdrawn and corrected in writing. Every tenant charged unexplained administrative fees in the past 2 years would receive a review. Every repair invoice connected to Northline maintenance would be turned over to the city and to outside counsel. Darius Kincaid stood beside Mariah, not in front of her. That mattered. He did not speak over her. He did not turn her pain into his speech. He waited until Ms. Bell finished, then looked around the lobby at the people who had learned to keep their complaints small because small complaints were safer. "This building was purchased under my investment group," he said. "That means the failure is mine too." The lobby stayed silent. Darius did not soften it. "I did not know what was happening here. But I should have built a system that made it impossible not to know." Mariah looked at him then. Not with gratitude. Not yet. Gratitude was too small for a morning like this. She looked at him like a mother measuring whether a powerful man understood the difference between rescue and repair. Darius reached into his coat and unfolded a printed letter. "Effective today, this property is under independent management. No tenant will be removed while the audit is open. No late fee, legal fee, inspection fee, or administrative charge added by the previous management team will be collected until each one is verified. Emergency repairs begin this afternoon. Not cosmetic work. Real repairs. Walls opened. Mold remediated. Plumbing replaced. Heat and electrical systems inspected unit by unit." Mr. Reed lowered his eyes for a moment, and Mariah knew why. Men who have spent months being ignored do not always know what to do when someone finally says the thing they have been asking for out loud. Then Darius turned to Mariah. "Ms. Walker, your family services record will be corrected today. Ms. Bell has already contacted the case supervisor." Angela Morris, the worker from the night before, stepped forward from near the office door. She looked different in daylight. Less like a threat. More like a woman carrying the weight of a form she wished she had questioned sooner. "Mariah," she said, "I reviewed the evidence this morning. The report should never have been filed the way it was. I am submitting a written correction, and I will personally confirm that there is no finding against you." Mariah's throat tightened, but she did not let the tears come. Not there. Not in front of the same desk where they had tried to turn her motherhood into a liability. "I want a copy," she said. Angela nodded. "You will have one before I leave." That was the first gift. Not money. Not pity. A clean record. A mother's name returned to her. The second came at 2:15 that afternoon when workers arrived with plastic sheeting, respirators, moisture meters, and tool bags heavy enough to mean they were not there to paint over anything. Nia stood in Mrs. Alvarez's doorway holding honey, the stuffed rabbit she carried when she was nervous, and watched two men remove the damaged drywall above the kitchen window. Behind it, dark rot spread along the studs like an old secret finally dragged into light. Mariah covered her mouth. Not because she was surprised. Because for months she had been told she was exaggerating. Lazy. Difficult. Too emotional. And there, inside the wall, was proof that her fear had been reasonable all along. The lead inspector took photographs, then turned to Mariah. "You were right to keep reporting it." 5 words. No apology could have reached her the way those 5 words did. You were right. The third gift came 1 week later in a community room that had always smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, now filled with tenants, legal aid volunteers, city officials, and folding tables stacked with corrected account statements. Refund checks were issued first to the families hit hardest. Mr. Jackson from 4B, who had paid $600 in illegal access restoration charges. Mrs. Alvarez, who had been billed twice for pest treatment that never happened. Mariah, whose ledger showed $2,340 in improper fees, all reversed, with a separate settlement placed into a protected account for Nia's medical expenses and temporary housing while 7C was repaired. But the money was not the moment that made Mariah look away and press her fingers to her lips. It was the letter. Darius handed it to her in an envelope with her name printed correctly. Mariah Walker. Not delinquent resident. Not case number. Not tenant under review. The letter stated that she had acted responsibly, documented unsafe housing conditions, protected her child's health, and helped expose misconduct affecting the entire property. It was signed by Darius, Ms. Bell, and the city housing office. Mariah read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the front pocket of Nia's yellow backpack, the same pocket that had carried the invoice. Nia looked up at her. "Is that paper important?" Mariah touched the zipper. "Very important." "More important than the other paper?" Mariah looked across the room. Calvin Broom's name had been removed from the office door. Denise Palmer had resigned and agreed to testify in the investigation. Northline maintenance was under review. The false photographs were no longer a weapon. The work order number was now evidence. The building that had tried to push people out was finally being forced to listen to the people inside it. "Yes," Mariah said softly. "The other paper proved what they did. This one proves who we are." That evening, when they returned to their temporary apartment 2 blocks away, Nia placed her inhaler on the nightstand, lined up her school shoes by the door, and taped her gold star spelling test above the small kitchen table. Mariah stood beneath it for a long moment. Outside, repair trucks idled in front of the old building. Windows glowed one by one. Not perfect. Not finished. But changed. And for the first time in months, when Mariah locked the door for the night, it was not because someone had shut her out. It was because she and her daughter were safely inside. 3 months later, the yellow backpack hung from a hook beside the front door of apartment 7C, clean, patched, and heavier with meaning than it had ever been with books. The building did not smell wet anymore. The hallway lights worked. The stairwell door closed properly. In Mariah's kitchen, sunlight came through the window without catching on a brown stain above it. The wall had been opened, repaired, sealed, and painted, but Mariah still looked at that spot sometimes, not because she wanted to remember the fear, but because she needed to remember that she had not imagined it. Nia sat at the table doing homework, her inhaler resting in the same place where the old invoice had once been unfolded. Only now, beside it, there was a framed copy of the letter that said Mariah Walker had told the truth. Darius had offered her a job more than once. Not charity. A tenant advocacy role with the new Housing Accountability Office his company created after the audit. Mariah accepted after she read the contract twice, asked 3 questions, and made them correct one sentence that sounded too much like gratitude instead of work. On her first day, she brought the yellow backpack with her. Inside the front pocket was not the fake invoice anymore. It was Nia's gold star spelling test, and a stack of complaint forms for tenants who did not know where to begin. That evening, Mariah stood in the lobby where she had almost lost everything. Mrs. Alvarez waved from the mailboxes. Mr. Reed nodded from the elevator. A new mother stood at the leasing desk, holding a folded notice and shaking hands. Mariah walked over, gentle but steady, and said, "Let me see the paper." The woman looked embarrassed. Mariah knew that look. She had worn it. So she smiled, not with pity, but with recognition. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the glass doors. Once that sound had meant a locked code, a sick child, and a mother standing alone. Now it meant something else. Proof could survive the rain. So could dignity. And sometimes the smallest paper, carried in the pocket of a child's backpack, could open a door no one had the right to close.